So my family moved around a lot between different parts of the UK because of relatives and work stuff. So I spent chunks of my childhood in many different places. One thing that stayed consistent though was my dad's weird hobby of dragging me out to look at old ruins. Not the famous tourist places either. He liked finding random, mostly forgotten structures that were barely maintained. When I was about 11, we were living in southern Wales, near the border with England. My dad had gotten into this habit of looking up obscure historical sites online and then driving out to them on weekends. He called it rune hunting. Most of the time it meant driving an hour just to look at a crumbling stone structure in the middle of farmland. One Saturday, he told me that he'd found an old fortress ruin somewhere pretty rural. It wasn't on any official tour list, which is exactly why he wanted to go and see it. According to what he read, the place dated back to the late 1400s and had been abandoned for centuries. After about an hour and a half of driving through smaller and smaller roads, we eventually pulled over next to a dirt lane beside a sheep pasture. There wasn't a parking lot or a sign or anything nearby, just a broken metal gate and, way out in the field, the ruins of a stone structure. From a distance, it looked bigger than the stuff that we usually visited. Most of the walls were collapsed, but a few sections were still standing pretty tall. 2 partial towers were still there too, though they were pretty cracked and covered in plants now. It didn't look maintained at all. Honestly, it looked like something people normally wouldn't be even allowed to walk around in. My dad didn't care about that kind of thing though. He grabbed his flashlight from the car and we climbed over the gate and walked across the field. Once we got close though, you could tell that the place was in pretty rough shape. Parts of the ground were uneven where the old floors had collapsed. There were random holes and piles of loose stone everywhere. My dad was walking around taking photos while I just sort of followed him. One thing that stood out immediately though was a doorway into one of the remaining walls. It led into what looked like a room inside of the structure, but the inside was completely dark. I mean, pitch black. The sun was out, but none of the light reached inside the entrance anymore. I walked up to the doorway and stood there for a second, trying to see anything inside, but I couldn't. It was completely black. But here's the weirdest part. So, I had this really strong urge to step inside anyway. I know that sounds dumb, but that's the best way that I can explain it. I was nervous about it because I hated dark places when I was younger, but at the same time I felt this pull, like I should just walk in and see what's there. I even took a couple of steps forward before stopping myself. Something about it felt wrong, like my brain was telling me to do it, but another part of me was saying that it was a really bad idea. So I backed away and I decided to just walk around the outside of the ruins instead. A few minutes later though, I found another opening on the other side of the structure. This one wasn't a room though. It was more like a narrow passageway built into the wall, almost like a tunnel that went inward. Unlike the first doorway, some daylight reached inside this one, so I could see a part of the floor, and it sloped slightly downward and then turned into darkness further in. And again, I got that same weird feeling, the same urge to go inside. At that age, I was usually the kind of kid who avoided stuff like that completely, but for whatever reason, I stepped into the passage and I walked a few feet in. I didn't have a flashlight or anything, so once the light from outside faded, I really couldn't see ahead of me anymore. I remember sort of standing there looking into the dark part of the tunnel and feeling like I should just keep walking. Like, if I just went a few more steps, I'd figure out what was back there. But something about it made me hesitate again. I started thinking about the floor being uneven and the fact that the whole place looked like it was about to collapse. And that snapped me out of it. So I turned around, but as I did, I swear to you that I heard a voice come from the darkness somewhere, saying, "Come here and come inside." I immediately left after hearing that. After that too, I found my dad and I told him about the tunnel thing that I'd seen and the voice that I'd heard. He was curious, so he went over with his flashlight to check it out. I stayed outside while he walked inside this time. From where I was standing, I could see the beam from his flashlight moving around the walls. He only stayed there for about maybe 20 seconds before he came back out again. And that surprised me too, because normally he'd explore every corner of these places, so I asked what was in there, and he said that right where the dark section started, the floor apparently dropped into a really steep and deep pit. Apparently, part of the structure had collapsed a long time ago and left a hole, like at least several feet down, filled with broken stones and old bricks, and it looked extremely dangerous if someone were to fall in there. According to him, if someone kept walking in the dark, they would almost definitely fall straight into it and at least break legs or something like that. And hearing that honestly freaked me out so much more, because when I went in earlier, I was probably only maybe a step or two away from where that drop started. If I had followed that weird impulse to keep going, or got curious about that voice, I probably would have walked straight into it. We stuck around the outside of the ruins another 10 minutes or so, and then we headed back to the car eventually. On the drive home, I mentioned the first doorway too, the one that was completely dark inside, and I asked if he checked out while I was walking around what was in there, and my dad is the kind of guy who normally doesn't get bothered by stuff. He used to be in the military, and he's done plenty of sketchy things without thinking twice even, so I expected him to say yes, but instead he just said no. I asked why not, and he kind of shrugged and said the room felt unstable and he didn't like the look of it. He said the floor inside might have been collapsed and he didn't want to risk it, even with the flashlight. That response actually surprised me a lot. I'd seen him climb out onto our roof with no safety gear just to fix a chimney before, so hearing him say that he didn't want to step into a room that felt unusual was really weird. Anyway, we left and, well, that was that. But the reason I still think about that place is the feeling that I had when I stood in those entrances. I mean, I've been in plenty of old buildings before and ruins since then, and I've never had that same weird pull to walk into a dark area like that ever again. Also, I haven't heard any voices ever again, too. I've tried a few times over the years to figure out exactly which ruin that was, too, mostly out of curiosity, and I asked my dad about it recently, and he remembers the trip, but not the name of the place, and he thinks it might have been somewhere near the Wye Valley, but he isn't 100% sure. He also said that he might still have some photos from that day on an old hard drive somewhere, so if he ever finds them, I might finally figure out where it was, and I'll also probably upload them here as well. But yeah, that's the story, and I still don't have an explanation for really any of it. And it's still definitely weird to think just how close I might have been to stepping straight into that hole without even realizing it. I've been debating sharing this for a while now because, honestly, it still makes me uncomfortable to talk about it even. But I would really like to hear if anyone has experienced anything similar to this. I'm not jumping straight to paranormal explanations or anything like that too. I'm genuinely just trying to figure out what the heck was going on. So, around 2016, my husband and I bought about 15 acres of land in Louisiana. It is extremely rural too. To reach the property, for instance, you leave the highway and then drive several miles down gravel and dirt roads with nothing around. When there's heavy rain too, the low areas flood and sometimes the road becomes difficult to pass for a day or two here. One reason that we bought it was because the land was cheap and completely surrounded by undeveloped forest. Behind our property, there's a huge stretch of state-managed wildlife land, and on the other side there's tribal territory that has been there for a long time. Because of that too, the area has tons of animals. Deers, hogs, coyotes, even the occasional black bear. My husband, he's a military veteran, and being out somewhere quiet like that helps him a lot mentally. He's been through multiple deployments, and nature is one of those few things that consistently helps him relax. When we bought the land too, the listing, it mentioned that there were 3 structures somewhere on it: an abandoned house, a small hunting cabin, and an old deer stand. The realtor admitted that the land was so overgrown that she had never actually seen the last 2, but we located the main structure the first day. It wasn't really a house anymore, I guess you could say, more like a collapsing shack, really. The roof was partially gone, the floor had holes in it. Our plan from the beginning was to tear it down and eventually build something new. We also spent 2 full days walking the rest of the property, trying to locate the other 2 structures, and we actually tried to do it pretty methodically too. We walked the land in a sort of grid pattern using a GPS app so we wouldn't miss anything, but still nothing. Eventually though, we started demolishing the old shack, and while breaking up the bathroom area, my husband was removing an old cast iron tub with a sledgehammer, and when the tub cracked open, something came loose and stuck to the head of the hammer. It was a pair of small children's underwear. They had a cartoon character on them, and inside was what looked like a used sanitary pad. There was a brown stain on it. We both just sort of stood there staring at it because it made absolutely no sense. Then we looked under the tub and found several more pairs stuffed into the dirt and the debris underneath. At this point, we stopped what we were doing and called the local sheriff's office. The only information that we had about the previous owner was that he was currently in prison apparently, but we didn't know what the charges were. But we thought that maybe this could be evidence of something serious. The sheriff's office took down our information over the phone, but nobody ever came out to collect anything. We ended up taking pictures of the items and then burning them because we didn't really know what else to do with it. After that day though, things started feeling strange around the property. Not dramatic stuff, but just a constant sense that someone might be nearby, even when there was nobody around. If you've ever had that feeling when you're walking alone at night and suddenly feel like you're being watched, it was basically that. I'd mostly notice it after dark as well. A couple of months later, we hired a logging crew to clear about 1 acre of trees so that we could install a well and some solar panels and whatnot. When the equipment finished clearing the area, something appeared that we hadn't seen before. It was the small cabin. It was sitting only about 60 feet behind the original shack that we had demolished. But that made no sense whatsoever because, we had searched that exact area multiple times. The underbrush must have just been so thick, though, that it was completely hidden. That's the only way that we could explain it. The cabin itself was in decent shape, and when we opened it, we found a loft bed, an old wood stove, and several plastic storage bins. Inside of the bins were hundreds of letters written by the previous owner to his wife while he was in prison or something. Reading through them gave us a pretty clear idea of why he was locked up. The letters, they described different kinds of abuse within his own family. We contacted the authorities again about the letters, but they said that they weren't interested in collecting them. So we sealed the bins back up and we just left them in the cabin. For the next year, nothing really major happened too. Occasionally I would get that uneasy feeling at night, but we figured it was just because the place was isolated. But then, one summer evening, something happened that really still bothers me. So my daughter came inside the house and asked me why I had gone up to the cabin earlier and left a candle burning. I told her that I hadn't been anywhere near the cabin that day, and she insisted that she saw a light flickering through the window while she was outside with the dogs or something. That immediately made me nervous because we almost never go inside that building. So I quickly went outside and looked toward it, and there was definitely a candle burning in the window. I woke up my husband and I told him that someone might be inside. He grabbed a flashlight and one of the dogs and went to check it out while I stayed near the phone. He was gone about a half an hour. When he came back, he said that the cabin was empty. No footprints, no vehicles nearby, nothing disrupted except for a single oil candle burning on a shelf, which he confirmed was there. Our dogs, well, they usually run ahead when exploring, but he said that they acted strangely, that they stayed behind him the entire time when he was there. We never figured out how that candle got lit, or how it even got there to begin with. But after that, we still lived there for several years, and most of the time things were pretty normal. Occasionally we would hear noises outside at night, but with that much wildlife around, it's hard to know what's actually making them. During that time too, we also dealt with several family losses, which made those years kind of blur together, I guess. Last year though, we finally upgraded our living situation and we brought in a newer mobile home to replace the old one. And almost immediately after moving into it, I started noticing small things again. At night in the kitchen, I would hear sounds like one of our cats jumping off their tower behind me. Every time that I turned around though, there was no one there and no animals or cats or anything. My daughter, who is 18 and usually pretty calm, started saying that she felt uneasy sleeping in her room and began keeping the dogs in there at night too. Then, a few weeks ago, something else strange happened. So, I had bought some decorative battery-powered candles at one stage. They're the kind that turn on with a small switch, and randomly, one would turn on by itself. At first, I assumed it was a loose switch or maybe defective electronics or something. But after buying a completely different brand, the same thing kept happening. One candle at a time would suddenly turn on when nobody touched it. But the weirdest moment, that happened a few nights ago. So I was laying in bed listening to an audiobook while doing a puzzle on my phone. My husband had already fallen asleep next to me, and at some point I felt pretty uneasy and sort of looked over. His arm was raised slightly in the air while he was asleep, like he was reaching upward. And right above his hand was one of those candles, and it had turned on. I grabbed my phone and took a photo because the whole scene looked just so strange, but the moment that the picture snapped, his arm dropped back down and the candle slowly sort of fizzled out. I honestly don't know what to make of any of this, which is part of the reason why I'm here. Maybe there are some normal explanations for everything that we've experienced, but living out there has definitely had moments where things just didn't make a lot of sense. At this point, we just sort of keep the doors locked at night, keep the lights around the property on, and we try not to overthink every little sound, but I just can't get over it, and so if you guys have any idea as to what I can do about any of this, if you have any ideas as to whether this is paranormal or something else, please do let me know because I'm a bit lost in all of this. This happened earlier this year and it messed with my head way more than I expected. Back in March, my dog Max died. He was a lab mix that I had had since college, so basically almost 10 years. He started having kidney problems and got pretty bad pretty quickly. One night he could barely stand and I ended up taking him to an emergency vet clinic. It was around 1 a.m, I think. And long story short, they said it was his time. I stayed with him while they put him down and then drove home with his collar in my pocket, with the house feeling completely different. Anyone who's lost a pet probably knows what I mean by this. For the first couple of weeks, I kept catching myself doing stupid things too, like stepping over the spot where his bed used to be or thinking that I heard him walking around. My brain was still on autopilot, I think. Anyway, the weird part started happening about maybe 2 weeks later. So one night I was sitting in the living room around midnight watching YouTube with my headphones on. I paused the video and right when the room went quiet, I heard a dog whimper. Not a bark and not a howl, just a sort of whining sound like a dog trying to get somebody's attention. It came from the hallway. My first thought was honestly that I left the video playing somewhere, or maybe it came from outside or something. I walked through the apartment checking everything. Bathroom, kitchen, my bedroom, even the closet where Max used to sleep sometimes, but nothing. I even opened the front door and stepped out into the hallway of the building, thinking that maybe someone on another floor had a dog or something, but it was dead quiet. I kind of shrugged it off because losing him had been rough enough, and I figured that my brain was just filling in sounds that it was used to hearing or something. But unfortunately, it didn't stop there. So a few nights later, I was in bed scrolling on my phone at around 12:30, and I heard the exact same thing again. Same kind of drawn-out little cry. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough that I sat up immediately. This time I went straight to the front window, thinking that maybe a stray dog was outside. But my building faces a small parking lot and a fenced construction area across the street at the moment. But there were no dogs, no people, nothing moving. After that, though, it happened maybe 4 or 5 more times over the next couple of weeks. Always late, always when everything else was quiet, and every single time it sounded really similar to the noise Max used to make when he wanted to go out at night. I never told anyone because, it sounds ridiculous even to me. I figured that it had something to do with normal, pipes in the building, or maybe some sort of weird echo from the alley outside or something in the end. But then something happened that made it way harder to ignore, and also made me think that it wasn't him. So I live with one roommate, a guy named Derek, and one night we were both home, but in our separate rooms, and it was probably around 1 in the morning again. I was at my desk when I heard that sort of whimper again from the hallway. But before I even had time to react, I also heard my name being called. Then Derek opened his door and said pretty loudly, "Do you hear someone in here?" I walked out and I asked what he meant. He said that he thought that he heard a dog and that it was crying, and a voice somewhere in the apartment, and asked if I had brought someone's dog inside without telling him. He even mimicked the exact kind of whine that he heard, and it was the same sound that I'd been hearing for weeks now. So at that point, I finally told him what had been going on. We both did a full check of the place. We even went down the stairwell this time and outside around the building, thinking that maybe a dog was stuck somewhere nearby or something. But there was nothing. But then, as we came back into the apartment, both of our doors to our rooms slammed at the same time, and then we heard what sounded like scratching coming from the back sides of both doors at the same time. We left the apartment immediately, and we contacted the police in the end, thinking that somebody may have broken in or something. The police came, did their rounds, but there was no one inside, and, they checked everything. The strangest part, though, is that after that night, it just completely stopped. We haven't heard anything since then. A couple of weeks later, Derek mentioned something that might explain it too. There's a small storm drain behind the building that connects to a big concrete runoff tunnel under the road, and apparently animals get trapped down there sometimes, and the sound can echo through the drainage pipes. If a dog or even a coyote got down there, it might at least explain why the sound carried into the building late at night. Well, that's what he said anyway. And look, I guess that's a plausible explanation for the sound at least, but the fact that both of those doors slammed at the same time like that, and the scratching sound, man, if I had to put my finger on it, that whole thing seemed like demonic or something. Still though, hearing that exact sound over and over right after losing Max, and then having someone else finally hear it too, it really got to me in a way that few things do. I think that I'm mostly over it now, but for a few weeks there I definitely wasn't sleeping great, and every time the apartment got quiet at night again, I kept expecting to hear that same whining again, but I never did. So I just moved into my first solo apartment about a week ago, and everything was fine at first, just the usual unpacking and settling in. But then, 3 nights ago, something happened that honestly made me freeze. At exactly 1:12 in the morning, There were 3 slow knocks on my front door. Not aggressive and not hurried, just deliberate. My heart started pounding a bit. I ran to the peephole, looked out, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no sounds from the elevator, nothing. I thought that maybe it was someone at the wrong apartment, so I ignored it. The next night, same time, same 3 slow knocks. Again, no one there when I checked. I even opened the door fully this time, hallway completely empty. Then the 3rd night, it got worse. Same time and same knocks, but this time after the 3rd knock, I heard a voice coming from just beyond the door, and I swear to you that it was my own voice, clear, calm, saying, "Open up." I froze. I don't know how that's even possible. I was in the apartment. Nobody else could have been there, and I ran to check the peephole again, but again, the hallway was empty. I even called my neighbor in the next unit to see if they had seen someone, but they hadn't. The knocks, they haven't stopped too. Every night at exactly 1:12 in the morning, 3 slow, polite knocks. Every night, the voices come after, sometimes like mine and sometimes like a whisper that I don't recognize, but always saying the same thing. I've started keeping my phone on me and recording, but so far there's nothing on playback. It's like it only exists in the moment that I hear it. It doesn't sound random. It's definitely intentional, calm and patient. Like whoever or whatever is doing it knows exactly what they're doing. I've tried leaving the door open a crack during the night, thinking that maybe it's some prank or something harmless. The knocks certainly stop, but then the whispers start from inside of the apartment, coming from nowhere that I can really locate. I've sat in my living room for hours listening, in fact, and it doesn't sound like it's moving toward me. It just sort of exists. I haven't told anyone in real life yet. I don't want to sound insane, and I keep telling myself that it's just stress or sleep deprivation, maybe even some kind of auditory hallucination or something. But the timing is so precise every time, and I've even set alarms and timers now. I've been awake for 1:12 in the morning intentionally, and the knocks happen on time, every time. I'm honestly starting to consider moving, or at least getting some sort of security camera in the hallway. But I'm scared that whatever it is might see that and actually escalate. Has anyone ever had something like this happen to them? 3 slow knocks every night, exact time, and then hearing a voice that you know is yours telling you to open the door. I really don't know how much longer I can handle this. I've always considered myself someone who doesn't buy into ghosts or paranormal stuff. I mean, I have had some weird experiences over the years for sure, but I usually chalk them up to just overthinking. Except for one night. That one still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it, and I had completely forgotten about it for years, until recently. So, a few years back, I was babysitting for my cousin Leah, and she had 2 daughters at the time, Maya and Lila. They were 7 and 4 respectively. Lila was one of those kids who was either crying or screaming from the moment that the parents left. Nothing calmed her down either. Maya was calmer mostly, but she had a little bit of a streak of mischief for sure. The house that we were in was new, just built, but something about it always felt off. Not in a sort of haunted house obvious way, but there was this sort of weight to it, I guess. Like the rooms were really quiet and just really empty. Weird creaks, shadows that didn't match up with anything from time to time, and a general stillness that made me uneasy. The bedrooms were weirdly arranged too. Maya was on the second floor, Lila had a small room tucked into the attic, and the parents' room was right across the hall from Maya's. Now, normally I check the girls every hour or two, but that night was different. I went to check on Maya first, and she was asleep, nothing unusual. Then I went up to Lila's room. There was a chair on top of her bed, and she was asleep under it. I thought, okay, kids do some strange stuff, and so I removed it, went back downstairs, and she didn't wake up. Now, 10 minutes later, I went back to check, and the chair was on the bed again. I moved it and went back downstairs again, thinking that, oh, maybe she must have woken up and put it back there or something. Last round of the night, though, same thing, the chair on the bed again. At this point, I was a bit tense, starting to feel really wrong about this house. I decided to take the chair downstairs with me, so it wouldn't keep happening. Halfway down the stairs, though, my neck hairs just stood up instantly. I stopped. The parents' bedroom door was slightly open, just a crack. I froze, though, because I swear to you that I felt eyes on me. Someone or something was watching me, and I couldn't see anything but just dark shapes behind the door. And then the door slammed shut so hard that it literally rattled the frame and the entire house. The oldest, Maya, came out of her room at the same time. She looked at me, calm but wide-eyed, like she already knew something that I didn't. I asked her if she had opened the door, but she shook her head. She said quietly, "Don't look in there. It's better if we stay downstairs." At that point, I wasn't about to argue too. My stomach dropped, my hands were shaking, and for the first time in my life, I genuinely felt unsafe in a house full of people. When Leah got home later, I tried to explain what had happened. She just sort of smiled faintly though and said, "Yeah, I know, just let it go. Nothing you can do about it anyway." She acted like it was normal, like she'd been through it herself or something. And something about that freaked me out even more. After that night, though, I never babysat there again. I asked Leah about it years later, hoping that she'd give me an explanation, but she just repeated the same line, "Just let it go." What haunts me about this, too, isn't the chair on the bed or the slamming of the door or anything. It's always been the weight in the house and that feeling that something was aware of me there, and that the kids seemed to know more than even I did. Maya's calm reaction told me that she'd seen or felt the same thing before for sure, but she wasn't scared and had just sort of accepted it. Even now, thinking about that night, I get chills. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know if it's still there or not, but I know whatever it was, it didn't need to make noise or move objects to make its presence known. It just existed, and I am absolutely sure that it was watching. So, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not trying to make this some viral post or anything. I'm not after money or attention or anything. I just want to share something that my family has passed down and maybe see if anyone out there has had a similar experience to it. Genuinely, that's it. So this story comes from my great-grandfather, who was a guaco in Argentina, driving cattle from the Cordoba Plains down to Buenos Aires. He did this basically from the early 1900s until the 1950s. And while at the time it was in the 1950s in Argentina, it still felt like the 1930s in the US. No real roads, no electricity everywhere, very rural, and people were largely isolated. But he knew the land like the back of his hand back then. Every tree, hill, creek, every sound. He could tell a fox from a stray dog even, an owl from a hawk. But one night, while out late moving cattle, he heard a sound that just didn't fit any pattern that he knew. He followed it on horseback slowly, apparently, The horse grew restless the closer they got, and eventually he reached an area that he didn't recognize, like a hidden hollow within a thicket. It was swampy vegetation. Not a swamp like a real marsh, but just sort of soggy. Dense plants that didn't belong there, is how he described it. And that was when he saw them. He described them as creatures that were enormous, standing on two legs, moving awkwardly across the water, making a sound that he had never heard before. He estimated them 2 or 3 times the height of the horse's head, with long necks and tails and scaly sort of lizard-like skin. His horse refused to step any closer, and he swore that he could see their eyes reflecting in the moonlight. He said that it wasn't just 1 or 2, there were several, all moving quietly but deliberately. He claimed that he froze, too afraid to get closer or spook them. After a while, he decided to retreat back to the cattle and wait until morning, and the next day he went back to the same spot, and the entire area looked completely normal. No swamp, no strange plants, no creatures. He checked for hours as well, but nothing. It was as if the place just vanished overnight. But here's the part that makes it stick with me the most. My grandfather was not someone to exaggerate. He never drank, never told jokes even, and wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was practically illiterate, grew up isolated, and had no access to movies, books, or radio that could give him ideas about dinosaurs or giant lizards or anything. Yet, he told this story for decades, until he passed away. Everyone who heard it thought that he was making it up, but he always swore in his life that it was real. Some things I've thought about over the years too is, was it a glimpse of something from the past? Like a window showing animals that had long disappeared? Was it some kind of a hallucination caused by the isolation or something like that? Maybe the exhaustion, or maybe he ate something wrong? Or was it a species unknown to science, something that managed to survive hidden in that environment for a long time? I've never heard another story like this from anyone in the family, or anyone else from the area even. But it's always intrigued me. He described the creatures with such precision and calm, almost like he was trying to report it scientifically rather than freak out. I'd love to hear if anyone else out there has had anything similar happen, or if they've heard of anything like this, like seeing animals or creatures that shouldn't exist in our time or place, or a vision of prehistoric type creatures or something. I can answer some questions if anyone wants more details about the location, what he described, or his routine even. But just again to reiterate, this is 100% what my great-grandfather claimed to have experienced, and it's been passed down through my family, eventually making it to me. This happened back in 2022. Me and my friends, Chris, Marcus, and Leo, decided to have a sleepover at Marcus's house. It was the kind of neighborhood where everything is neat, quiet, and a little too empty at night. Marcus, though, had somehow gotten an old spirit board from his older cousin. None of us had ever tried one before. We didn't set it up until around midnight, after a bunch of snacks and video games. But before we even started, though, we agreed to follow all the rules that we read online. No joking around, no asking about death, don't invite anything in, and that kind of stuff. At first, nothing really happened, too. We asked if anyone was there, and after a few minutes, the planchette slowly moved. Genuinely, I thought one of my friends was messing with me, but when I looked around, all of them were frozen, staring at it just like me. We asked simple things at first, like what time it was. The board spelled out 12:57 a.m. I checked my phone, and it was exactly right. That freaked us out more than anything else, I think. We didn't ask about death or names, thinking that that would be too disrespectful. But we did ask if the spirit was friendly, and the board spelled bad. At that exact moment, we heard something from downstairs too. Not a regular house noise, but banging and scraping, like furniture being pushed around. Then the basement door, locked all day, slowly creaked open on its own, then slammed shut with enough force to rattle the walls. I could feel my hand shaking, and we looked back at the board, and it started spelling something out by itself. "I see you" is what it spelled. Then there was a deafening bang from downstairs, and that was it. We all jumped up and agreed to end the session immediately. I called my mum to pick me up, and the others went to sleep at a different friend's house for the night. I was too shaken to do anything but go straight to my bed once I got home. Around 3:40 in the morning, I woke up though to a faint whisper. It sounded like my voice repeating the words that we saw earlier, "I see you." I woke up with my heart dropping, and I looked toward my window, and I swear to you that there was a shadow figure, tall and featureless, standing just outside staring at me. My bed was directly across from the window, and I froze for a second, then bolted out of the room screaming for my parents. They came in and checked, but the figure was gone. They asked me to explain what had happened, and when I told them about the board, they were furious that we'd even touched it. They called in a priest to bless both me and the house. My friends' families did the same thing for their kids' houses, just to be safe, and I'm 18 now, and I still remember that night clearly. I don't know if it was real, some kind of shared hallucination, or something else entirely, but I never want to touch a spirit board ever again, and I avoid anything paranormal completely now. That night, it left me feeling like I saw something that I really wasn't supposed to, and I've never felt completely normal in a quiet, dark house since then. I've been living in Malaysia for a few years now. My wife and I, we have 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a newborn. We've been trying to fix up a house in a small town outside of a major city, but there were just too many problems with it. So we decided to move temporarily into a beach house owned by one of her cousins. We thought that it would be a fresh start for the family. The first thing that we noticed, though, was a horrible rotting smell. It would just appear sort of randomly in different rooms, mostly near the kitchen and the living area. My wife mentioned it first, which threw me off because I had smelled it too, but I assumed that I was imagining it. I figured that it was just something washed up on the beach, or maybe a dead crab in the drainage system or something. But then, the weird stuff started. So one day, her father came over and left his digital watch on the living room table while he went to the bathroom. An hour later, it was gone, and I mean completely gone. We looked everywhere, under couches, inside drawers, behind furniture, no sign of it. We have security cameras in the house too, so I went through the footage to see if our toddler had picked it up or something, but on the video the watch is sitting there on the table like normal. I fast forward several minutes and suddenly it's just not there anymore. Nobody walks past it, no kid runs by, nothing touches it. It literally just sort of blinks out of existence. We spent hours looking for it. Her dad, my wife, me, even the cleaner joined in. A few mornings later, the watch was just back on the table again. We checked the footage again, and on the video it literally just appears on the table like it never left. At first, we tried to rationalize it, like maybe someone had moved it and we didn't see them, but then other things started happening too. The TV remote went missing for almost an entire day. We turned the house upside down looking for it. Then later that night it was sitting on the floor right in front of the TV, exactly in the same spot that we had walked past at least a dozen times. The thing that actually terrified me though the most was what happened with my wife's breast milk freezer. She'd been pumping and storing for months at this point. It's a huge amount of work. And one morning she noticed the freezer was unplugged. I immediately checked the cameras, and at 2:03 a.m., the plug just sort of dropped out of the wall by itself. Nobody was in the room. The socket isn't loose or anything. we had the freezer in that same spot for months, and we plugged it back in, and within days it's mechanically broke, and a $350 freezer, and it worked fine for a few weeks. But then one night, the plug popped out again, and all the milk inside was ruined. She was devastated too. I didn't know what to say. Genuinely, I was sort of scared too. The cameras are frustrating. I mean, sometimes they glitch right when something happens, and the clips that do capture it, they don't really show anything but sort of pixelation where something sort of appears. Or in this instance, just the plug slowly sliding out on its own, the remote moving or the watch vanishing like that, but no one is ever there and there's no explanation for it. It's gotten to the point where I dread going to sleep at night, in fact. I've thought about moving again, but I'm worried the same thing would happen anywhere. I don't know if it's some kind of a spirit, a poltergeist, or a technical issue that we just can't see, but whatever it is, it's targeting objects that matter to us, things tied to our family and kids. And so, because of that, I'm here to try and get some help as to how to remove this thing or what we can do about it. Does anyone out there know what this is, and if there's anything that I can do about it? Growing up in our house in northern Oregon, it always felt off. It wasn't old or anything. It was built in the late 80s on land that my dad's side owned. It was surrounded by wheat fields, a few farmhouses scattered around here and there, and dense patches of trees along the edges. You'd think a quiet place like that would feel peaceful too, but it just never really did. My older brother, Mason, would often talk about hearing footsteps in the kitchen at night. He'd get up and no one was ever there. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the bathroom door open too, even though he remembered locking it even. My little brother Eli, he used to say that he saw figures in the windows, people in masks or ancient clothes that he'd insist on, and he was barely 5 at the time. I always had this really weird feeling that someone or something was constantly watching me, but I really didn't know what to do with that feeling. Now, I was 14 at the time, and one Friday night, my friend Olivia came over. Mason was staying at his mother's house, and Eli was asleep in his room. My parents were already in bed at the time, and we were just sort of hanging out in my room, playing video games and joking around a bit, when we heard a soft tapping sound at my bedroom window. We froze. At first, we thought that it was a branch or maybe a bird, but then it happened again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. We both ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and we brought my dog with us. There was silence, for maybe 30 seconds, that is, because then the tapping returned, and way louder this time. Also, the door handle started shaking violently back and forth. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, but man, it felt like a longer time than that. Olivia screamed, I screamed, my dog was barking and growling like crazy, and I immediately tried calling my mum. She didn't respond, and so I started calling for my dad. He didn't respond either. We decided that we had to get out of there, so I grabbed Olivia's hand and we ran the length of the house to wake my parents up. By the time that we got there, everything looked normal and all the doors were locked, all the windows were shut. There is an attic hatch in the ceiling right across from the bathroom that we were hiding in, but there's no ladder there, so you can't really get up there without help at least. In other words, there's no way that anything could have been above us or even around us, really. That was the night too that I realized that the house wasn't just weird, but that the house had something in it, and that something was watching us. A few years later, my auntie, who lives nearby, got into what we called spiritual work, and she came by and said that she could see shadows looking in the windows at night when the lights were on. She also claimed that there was a portal in the woods behind our property that let in whatever it was that she considered evil. She did a cleansing ritual on the house after that, and Since then, I haven't had anything as intense happen again, which is weird. I've had a few minor things for sure, like doors creaking open, weird shadows in the corner of my vision, but nothing like that night. That one still sticks with me for sure, and probably because it was the first time that I felt directly threatened. I still have no idea what caused it. Could it have been a prank? Some animal? A combination of shadows, imagination, and old house noises? I don't know, but even now, years later, I get that same feeling walking past windows at night there, like someone might be looking at me. This happened when I was in 6th grade, so I must have been around 11 years old. My friends Liam and Zoe and we were walking home from school one late afternoon in early October. We were taking a shortcut through a part of town that we didn't usually go to, a small park by a patch of woods that no one really went into. As we were crossing the park, though, we saw a bunch of older kids sprinting out of the trees behind it. At first, we thought that maybe they were just messing around, but when we looked closer, it seemed like they were running from something inside of the woods, not the park itself. Dumb as we were, we decided to go and check it out. None of us had ever gone in there before, and so we thought that it would be fun. We must have gone about a half a mile into the woods before things started feeling a bit off. The sun was setting, and shadows were stretching weirdly between the trees, and eventually we came across an old concrete bridge over a dry creek bed. Older kids used to hang out there all the time and do whatever teenagers do, but no one had been down there for years because people said that squatters had moved in. Underneath the bridge, we noticed 3 large symbols scratched into the concrete. They looked like some kind of star circles, like something out of a horror movie, but the air just suddenly felt heavier all of a sudden. That's when I got this weird pressure in my chest. Liam and Zoe looked the same way, pale and sort of stiff. And so we decided to leave, but the second that we turned around, there was a large thump against the side of the bridge. We all jumped, but there was nothing there. No animals and no wind, just empty shadows. We ran for a while, and I kept thinking that I knew the way out, but the tree started looking all the same, and every turn just brought us back to the bridge, and it was like the woods had rearranged themselves. By now it was dark, around 9:30. Our phones were dead, and we didn't have any cell signal either. Panic was starting to set in, and then we heard it, branches snapping behind us. Not distant too, but like someone or something moving quickly, chasing us. That's when we realized that Zoe wasn't with us anymore. We called for her, but our voices barely carried. Then, from deeper in the woods, we heard a scream cut through the air. It was Zoe. We sprinted toward the sound and found her behind a thick tree lying on the ground. She was unconscious. When she woke up, she couldn't talk. She just sort of curled into a ball, shaking so violently that it was hard to even grab her to get her up. Liam had his arm around her as we slowly moved through the woods, trying to get out. Then I heard it, a low, quiet voice right behind us saying, "Leave." I froze, and so did the others. Then we sort of stood there for a bit with nothing else happening. Eventually we kept walking, and then came the noises. Branches just snapping all around us, just out of the corner of our eyes. I also glanced behind a tree at one point, and I swear that I saw something. A tall figure, at least 7 feet, completely black, peering around the tree at us. It wasn't moving like a person. It was sort of sticking its head out and watching us. Upon seeing that, we ran, not looking back. Zoe kept crying, repeating, not again, over and over. We didn't stop until we finally saw the park. We sprinted out of the woods, past the grass, and when I turned to look back, there was definitely something standing at the tree line, but it was hard to make out what it was. Then, all of a sudden, as I was watching, it just disappeared. We didn't speak about that night for years, too. Zoe, she allegedly still has nightmares about it, and none of us have ever gone there again near that park or those woods again. I'm 23 now, and I hate thinking about it. Whatever we saw that night, I know that it wasn't human, and it's something that none of us will ever forget. This happened when I was about 15. At the time, I was trying to make a bit of money selling random stuff that I didn't use anymore. Nothing fancy, just mostly old toys, video games, and some collectible figures I think that I had from when I was younger. But one of the bigger things that I listed was a box of Star Wars Lego sets that I'd had since like elementary school or something. They were just sitting there in my closet collecting dust, so I figured that I might as well sell them to someone who will use them. I posted the listing on Facebook Marketplace, and I didn't think too much about it. A couple of days later, though, someone messaged me saying that they wanted to buy the whole box. The guy's profile showed an older man, probably in his late 60s, smiling in the picture. His name was Robert, and he told me that the Legos were for his nephew's birthday. But the conversation got weird pretty quickly. Whenever I asked simple questions like when he wanted to meet or how he wanted to pay, he would sort of stop replying for like hours. Sometimes he'd only respond after I sent another message asking if he was still interested. The way that he typed, too, also didn't match the profile. The messages looked like they were written by someone way younger. Lots of spelling mistakes and short responses like, "Okay, bring tonight," things like this. At the time, I certainly noticed this, but I brushed it off. I mean, I was just excited that somebody actually wanted to buy the stuff. Eventually, though, he asked if he could meet the same night, and he suggested 9 p.m., which, looking back, was already a pretty big red flag. I told him that I couldn't meet at my house, so we agreed on a pickup spot outside of a small grocery store, about 10 minutes from where I lived. I still had a bad feeling about it, but my dad was working night shift that week, so I asked my mum if she could come with me instead, just in case. She immediately asked why the meeting had to be so late and suggested rescheduling. I told her that it would probably be fine and that I didn't want to lose the sale after all. After a bit of arguing, she agreed to come, but she said that we weren't getting out of the car until we saw who the person was. We drove over around 8:50, and instead of parking right in front of the store, my mum parked a little further down the street where we could still see the entrance. And almost immediately, I noticed somebody standing near the sidewalk. A guy was leaning against the streetlight holding his phone. He looked nothing like the profile picture. The profile showed an older man with grey hair and glasses, but the person outside looked maybe in his late 20s. Short hair, thin build, hoodie and a backpack. My mum noticed it too and asked me to message the buyer. She told me to say that I was already inside of the store and asked him to come in. So I texted him, "Hey, I'm inside by the front counter." Not even 10 seconds later, he replied, "Come outside." That was it. I messaged back saying that I couldn't and that he would need to come inside. He responded again telling me to come out to the street. At that point, my mum just sort of shook her head and said that we were leaving. But before we drove off, I sent one more message saying that I wasn't comfortable going outside and that if he wanted the Legos, he'd have to meet inside. And he replied with a single message, "LOL, idiot." That was it. Now, the weird part though is that right after that message, the guy near the streetlight looked directly toward our car and started walking in the opposite direction. And then, 2 other guys came out of the shadows and began walking with him. We didn't stick around to see what he did next. My mother immediately drove away and told me to block the account. When we got home, she made me delete the listing and report the profile, and genuinely I thought that that was the end of it too. But about 2 weeks later, I was talking with a friend from school, Ethan, who also sold Lego minifigures online. That's sort of where I got the original idea from. And while telling him about the situation, he suddenly interrupted me and asked, "Wait, Was the guy's name Robert? My stomach dropped. He showed me screenshots from his own marketplace messages. It was the exact same profile. Same story too, and he said that he wanted to buy the figures for his nephew. But he also kept insisting that they meet late at night in a parking lot again. Ethan never went through with it because the guy kept changing the meeting location and acting really strange. But after that, neither of us heard from that account ever again. I still don't know what the guy's real intentions were, but maybe it was just a scam. Maybe someone was trying to rob kids selling stuff online. But thinking about it now as an adult, the thing that bothers me the most is this. The guy standing outside of that store that night, he definitely was not alone. And quite honestly, if my mother had not come with me, I probably would have just walked right up to him. This happened in 2020. At the time, I was living just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and I had stopped by my boyfriend Aaron's office one afternoon to pick him up so that we could grab some food together after he finished work. His office was in one of those small commercial strips where there's like 5 or 6 businesses sharing the same parking lot. Nothing fancy, and when I pulled in, I noticed a guy standing near the side of the building. He looked maybe mid-20s, skinny, wearing a dark hoodie, even though it was pretty hot out. He had a small backpack and was messing around with a skateboard. What stood out to me wasn't really what he was doing. It was how he looked at us when we got out of the car. It wasn't a normal glance, he just sort of stared. No expression, long enough that it made me uncomfortable. Aaron didn't really notice it, or at least he didn't care. We went inside of his office and I mentioned it to him briefly. He laughed it off and said the guy was probably just killing time or waiting for someone. After about 20 minutes, we left again to go and grab some coffee from a place down the road. And when we came back 15 minutes later, I scanned the lot out of habit and didn't see the guy anymore. I remember actually feeling relieved for some reason too, but when we walked up to the building and pushed open the front door, he was suddenly right there inside of the entryway. He was crouched behind the glass door like he was trying to hide, which made no sense because the door was completely see-through. Anyone walking in could see him immediately. But the second that I saw him, I jumped and yelled. Not a big scream, more like a startled shout, I guess, but I've had some bad experiences before, so sudden stuff like that makes me react pretty hard. The weird part was the way that he reacted, though. He didn't apologize, he didn't look embarrassed. He just sort of stared at me with this half smile like he thought that it was funny that I got scared. At that point, I was definitely uncomfortable, but Aaron still thought that I was overthinking it. We went back into the office. I tried to shake it off, but I just couldn't stop thinking about the way that the guy had been waiting by the door like that. About 10 minutes later, I had to use the bathroom. The restroom was down a short hallway outside of Aaron's office. I told him that I was going, but asked him to keep the office door open just in case because the guy was still somewhere in the building. Aaron said that I was being paranoid, but he agreed anyway, and so I walked down the hallway and went into the bathroom. And the second that I locked that door, I got this really bad gut feeling. Not based on hearing anything, but just a really strong instinct that something just wasn't right. I finished up as quickly as I could and stood there for a second listening. Everything was quiet. When I unlocked the door and pulled it open, the guy was standing literally right outside, not walking past, not heading somewhere else, just standing there facing the door. I screamed immediately, and he jumped back like he hadn't expected me to react that way. I didn't wait to see what he was doing. I just ran straight back to Aaron's office and slammed the door. I told him that somebody was outside of the bathroom waiting for me and to call the police. He thought that I was exaggerating again and tried to go and take a look himself, but when he opened the door, the guy was already walking back toward the front entrance of the building. Aaron still wasn't convinced that it was serious, but I insisted that he call anyway. Something about the situation just didn't sit right with me. Police showed up about 10 minutes later, and here's the part that really bothers me still. The guy, he hadn't even left. He was sitting outside near the front door like nothing had happened. When the officers ran his information, they ended up arresting him right there too. Apparently, he already had an outstanding warrant connected to an assault case from another county. After the police took him away, one of the officers told me that it was a good thing that I trusted my instincts and called. I still think about just how weird that situation was, though. The guy didn't run, he didn't deny anything, he just hung around like he was waiting for something. And quite honestly, if I hadn't have reacted immediately when I opened the bathroom door like I did, I don't know what his plan actually was, but I'm almost certain that it wasn't anything good. So I know it might sound like I'm connecting dots that don't belong together, but the timing of everything has been weird enough that I just cannot ignore it anymore. So I'm 28 now and I work full-time at a state university in the Midwest. I also happen to be finishing my master's degree at the same school, so most days I'm basically on campus from early morning until late evening at least. I live about 15 minutes away in a ground floor apartment, in a pretty normal complex. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet and mostly students or older tenants. Now, things started getting strange around late summer last year. So, the first thing that I heard about actually happened when I wasn't even home. My neighbor across the hallway, an older woman named Diana, stopped me one morning while I was getting my mail. She asked if I had ordered food delivery late the night before, and I told her no, because apparently at around 12:30 in the morning, some guy had been standing outside of my door knocking for a really long time. She said that it went on for close to an hour, in fact, and eventually she opened her door slightly and asked what he was doing. He told her that he was a delivery driver stopping to drop off some food, but according to her, he didn't have any bags or anything with him, and he also apparently tried turning my doorknob several times before leaving. At the same time, I just sort of assumed that someone had the wrong address, but over the next couple of months, I started noticing other things too. On 3 separate nights, I woke up to something or someone tapping against my bedroom window. My apartment faces the parking lot, and my blinds are always shut at night, so I couldn't see anything outside. My dog would wake up barking every time that it happened, though, and so it was pretty annoying, but whenever I checked the window, though, nobody was ever there. Then, in October, something else happened that made the situation way more confusing. One afternoon, a woman showed up to my sliding patio door and started knocking pretty aggressively. I opened the door just enough to talk through the screen, and she immediately accused me of having stolen a device inside of my apartment or something. She claimed her phone tracking app showed that the signal was coming from my unit. I told her that she had the wrong place, but she insisted and eventually called the county sheriff's office. A deputy actually came out and spoke with both of us, and after a few minutes he told me that her app was indeed showing some kind of a signal from my general location, but he couldn't search my apartment without more evidence. The woman stood there in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, staring at my building before eventually she left. I never saw her again after that. By December, I thought the weirdness had stopped, but then one morning I was cleaning out my car and noticed something plugged into the port under the steering wheel. It was a small GPS tracker connected to the OBD port. I had never seen that before, but at first I thought maybe the mechanic had left it in there when I got my oil changed or something, but when I called the shop they told me that they don't use trackers like that and there's no reason to install one. That was when I called the police, and they took the device and wrote a report, but basically told me that there wasn't much that they could do without proof of who put it there. I also reported it to campus police since my car is parked at the university most days. But fast forward to about 2 weeks ago, and Right before I went to lunch at work, a guy walked into our office asking about student financial aid. That's not really something that our department handles, but I pointed him toward the correct office on the other side of campus. He was dressed oddly for the weather, though. Hoodie pulled up, sunglasses on, a surgical mask on, and one of those sort of disposable hairnets like you see in food service. His voice was really hard to understand, too, and he kept asking the same question even after I told him where to go. Then he wandered over to our break area and started making coffee using the staff coffee machine like he worked there or something. I left for lunch while he was still standing there, talking to one of the other student employees. When I came back, though, he was gone. But about 5 minutes later, he walked in again and sat in the lobby looking at his phone. He stayed maybe 2 minutes and then left again. At that point, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, universities get some really random people walking in all the time. But 2 days later, something happened that made me uneasy. It was Friday afternoon and most of our student staff had already gone home for the day. I was the only one left at the front desk. Within minutes of the office clearing out, that same guy walked in again wearing the exact same clothes as before. Same hoodie, same mask, and same sunglasses. He barely acknowledged me and said something about bringing bottled water for our coffee machine later, and then he walked out again. That was when I texted my department director and explained what had been happening. He works remotely most days, but he asked someone from the IT department in the building next door to come and sit in the office with me until closing. The IT guy set up his laptop in a nearby office, so it looked like I was alone at the front desk, but about 20 minutes later, the guy came back again. He then leaned over the front counter, trying to start a conversation with me about financial aid for the 4th time that week. And right then, the IT guy walked out of the office behind me and stood next to the desk. The man immediately stopped talking mid-sentence. He mumbled something about needing to go somewhere else, and he left the building within seconds. And he hasn't come back since. But the thing that bothers me is the timing. He only showed up again after everybody had left, and the police still haven't been able to tell me who placed the tracker on my car or how long it had even been there for. Maybe none of this is connected and it's just a bunch of really strange coincidences. But after the last few months, I've started double-checking my doors and covering my windows at night, and parking in different spots around campus too. I'd rather feel a little bit paranoid than ignore something that could actually be a problem later, I suppose. But what do you guys think? I mean, a GPS like this, it doesn't just randomly find itself in your car, right? I'm pretty sure that I'm being followed by someone or some people or something, and what do you guys think that I should do about it? This happened a long time ago now, but I still think about it sometimes. I'm sharing this because it sort of randomly popped back into my head the other night. So back in 2017, I was about 19 and living in a small coastal town in southern Sweden. It's a quiet place and pretty safe overall. At the time, I had a habit of taking long walks at night, not for exercise or anything serious. I just liked being outside when it was quiet and nobody else was around. I'd been doing that for years too without any problems. Same routes, same parks, same waterfront paths. I never ran into anything weird. One night though, in late October, probably around maybe 10:30 or 11 o'clock, I decided to walk through this old fortress area near the harbour. It's a historical site with stone walls, a moat, and a long wooden bridge that leads into a tunnel through the wall. During the day, it's full of tourists, but at night it's basically empty. It was already fully dark when I got there too. The park lights around the moat were on, but the castle grounds themselves were mostly shadowed. When I got close to the bridge, I noticed someone standing up on the wall above the entrance. At first I didn't think too much of it. I mean, people hang out there sometimes, like young adults or some teenagers. But the thing that stood out was that the person wasn't moving, like at all, just standing there facing out toward the park. I remember getting this sort of weird thought out of nowhere, like, whatever, it's a public place, I can walk where I want. So I started across the bridge. It's a long bridge too, maybe 50 meters, so you've got time to think while walking across it. But about halfway over, I started feeling a bit uneasy. Nothing had happened yet, obviously, but something about the situation just felt wrong. The person on the wall still hadn't moved, which was strange, and as I got closer to the tunnel entrance, I looked up again, and the guy was right above where the bridge meets the wall. And that's when I noticed something strange about his clothes. He was wearing what looked like a dark suit jacket with a light-colored shirt underneath. The shirt had a large dark stain right in the center of the chest area. At the time, it looked almost black in the low light, but it had that shape like something had spilled or maybe soaked through the fabric. I remember thinking that it looked a lot like dried blood, but I tried to tell myself that it was probably wine or something stupid like that. Still though, the feeling in my stomach kept getting worse as I got closer. I walked into the stone tunnel that leads through the wall into the courtyard. It's only about 10 meters long, but it echoes when you walk through it a lot. While I was inside, I almost turned around. Something in my head kept saying that this was a bad idea, but another part of me felt stupid backing out when technically nothing had happened yet. So I kept walking. When I came out the other side into the courtyard area, I instinctively turned around. The guy was already coming down the stone steps from the wall behind me, and the thing that freaked me out was the timing. I mean, the moment that I had gone into that tunnel, he must have turned and started moving immediately. There's no other way that he could have been that close already otherwise. He didn't say anything, just walking straight toward the courtyard. At that point, my brain went into this weird mode where I didn't want to run because I didn't want to trigger anything, so I just started walking faster toward the buildings near the center of the grounds. There are a couple of small museum buildings there and another tunnel exit on the far side that leads back toward town, so I looked back once more before reaching the buildings, and he was still following me. Same steady pace, not yelling, not running, just walking directly toward me. The second that I passed behind the buildings and knew that he couldn't see me for a moment, that was when I ran. Not jogging, full sprint. I went straight for the far tunnel and didn't slow down until I was across the second bridge on the other side of the moat. Once I reached the street too, I kept running through town instead of taking my normal route home, and I sort of zigzagged through side streets and small alleys just in case he had followed me out. By the time that I got home, I was completely out of breath. I locked the door and stood at the window watching the street for a long time, probably close to an hour, I would say, but nobody ever came down that road. Now, I don't know who that guy was or what he was doing there that night. Maybe he was just some drunk person wandering around. Maybe the stain on his shirt was nothing. But the way that he started moving the moment that I went into the tunnel, that part still bothers me a lot when I think about it. Ever since then, I haven't done those late night walks anymore. One thing that I did learn from that night, though, is that when your gut tells you that something isn't right, it's usually best to listen to it and leave. This happened when I was a kid, probably sometime around 2005 or maybe 2006. I'm 30 now, so the timeline is a little bit fuzzy, but I remember that it was during the time when those shoes with wheels in them were everywhere. I had a pair at the time and used them any chance that I got. I was in elementary school then, and my mum actually worked at the same school. The town that we lived in was pretty small, just a couple of main roads, a school, a few stores, and a post office that was less than a mile away from the school building. One afternoon, my mum had a couple of letters that she needed to drop off at the post office after school. I remember asking if I could go ahead of her because I wanted an excuse to roll down the sidewalk with my Heelys. The plan was simple too. I'd go ahead, she'd finish something inside of the school, then she'd follow right behind me in the car and meet me there. It was literally a few minutes away, so she didn't think too much of it. So, I leave the school and started heading down the sidewalk toward the post office. It was a normal afternoon, quiet road, barely any traffic. I'm just sort of rolling along, stopping every once in a while because honestly I wasn't that good with the shoes yet. About halfway there, this car pulls up next to me though. It was coming toward me in the opposite direction and slowed down as it passed. I remember it being a tan or a light brown sedan and nothing really flashy, just a regular four-door car. The passenger window was down and the guy leaned slightly toward it. He asked me something really simple, just, "Do you need a ride?" I immediately felt weird about it though. I mean, I didn't know this guy at all. I told him no, obviously, and said that I was meeting my mother at the post office. I didn't stop walking when I said it either. I just sort of kept moving down that sidewalk. The car rolled forward past me and kept going for a few seconds too, and I figured that that would have been the end of it. But then the car slowed again and turned into the school entrance that was just ahead of us. I thought that maybe he actually had business there or something, so I just kept going. Maybe a minute later, though, I hear the car again behind me. I look back and it's the same one. He had gone into the school parking lot, looped around and came back out onto the road, and now he was heading in the direction that I was going, same side of the street as me. At that point, I was getting close to the post office. I wasn't running or anything, but I definitely picked up my pace, and the car drove sort of slowly past me again. This time he didn't say anything. I remember just sort of staring straight ahead and pretending that I didn't notice him. Right as the car was creeping by though, I got to the post office entrance and I pulled the door open and went straight inside. The car kept moving down the road. I remember standing inside of the building for a minute, just sort of watching through that glass door. The car didn't stop again and eventually disappeared down the street. The car didn't stop again and eventually disappeared down the street. At the time, it had only made me a little bit uneasy. I didn't think of it as some huge danger or anything, and I mean, I was a kid and I just figured that it was some random adult being a bit weird. But the part that really stuck with me, that happened next week. You see, over the next several days, I kept seeing what looked like the same car around town. One time it was parked across the street from the school when classes were getting out. I noticed it because the color and the shape looked familiar. I couldn't see the driver clearly though. Another day I saw it driving slowly through the grocery store parking lot when my mum took me there after school. It didn't stop near us or anything like that, but when it passed by I remember getting that same uncomfortable feeling again. A couple of days later, I saw it again at a gas station that was along the road that I took when walking home with friends. It was the same color, same type of sedan, and I'm sure it was the same one. It drove past slowly and then turned at the intersection, and I never saw the guy's face clearly enough those later times to know for sure if it was the same person or not, but I'm pretty sure that it was that same tan sedan, and I would put money on it, in fact. But as a kid, it started getting in my little head, I guess, and every time that I saw a car that looked like that, you pay attention to it, right? So, who knows? Maybe it was just a coincidence, but after maybe a week or so, it stopped happening, and either the car wasn't around anymore, or I just stopped noticing it or something. I didn't tell my mum about the guy asking if I needed a ride, and honestly, I didn't even think that it was worth mentioning at the time. Looking back now, that seems pretty dumb, right? It wasn't until years later when I was older and thinking back on random childhood memories that the situation actually hit me differently. some random guy pulls up to a kid walking alone, offers a ride, and then loops around the area again right afterward, and then the car shows up multiple times in different locations. I don't know. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he really thought that I was lost or something. But the fact that he turned around and came back, that's the part that really bothers me still. If the timing had been slightly different and I hadn't have reached the post office door right then as well, I sometimes wonder what that second conversation would have been. This happened actually earlier this year, around late January, and it still pops into my head sometimes when I'm driving past that same road in the morning. So my routine is pretty boring. I leave my house for work at around 5:30 in the morning most weekdays. There's a McDonald's about 10 minutes from my place, and if I'm awake early enough, I'll swing through the drive-thru and grab breakfast before heading to work. That morning, everything started normal too. It was still completely dark out like normal, street lights were on, but there isn't much lighting once you get outside the main part of town here. The road that I usually take after the drive-thru cuts through a stretch of woodland for maybe half a mile before you reach the industrial area where I work. I had just left the drive-thru as well, and was heading down that road at around 40 miles per hour. There's basically nothing out there at that time of day too. No houses, no businesses, just trees on both sides and a narrow sidewalk that nobody really uses. But as I came around a slight bend, I noticed movement off to the right side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or something crossing. But when my headlights hit the area properly, I could see that it was actually two people. Both were standing just inside the tree line, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the road. They were dressed in dark clothing, hoodies or jackets, I think. Couldn't tell exactly because it was still pretty dark, but what caught my attention was what they were doing. They were both holding onto what looked like a large black bag, the type that you'd normally see used for maybe like construction debris or heavy trash or something. But this one looked bigger than a normal household trash bag, and it also looked really heavy. The two of them, they were dragging it across the ground toward the deeper part of the woods. When I first saw them, I instinctively slowed down a bit. Not a full stop or anything, just eased off the gas down to about 30 miles per hour, because I was trying to figure out what I was actually looking at. Neither of them looked back toward my car at first. They were focused on pulling the bag. One guy was walking backwards while holding one end, and the other was gripping the middle section and kind of dragging it along. The weird part, though, is obviously the location. I mean, there were no cars parked anywhere nearby that I could see. No driveway entrances, no dirt pull-offs, nothing. Just trees and these two people in this really large black bag. If they had driven there, then their car should have been somewhere along the road, and I didn't see anything in either direction. As my car passed them, I glanced over again. One of the guys briefly turned his head toward the road, and I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell that they were both probably mid-30s or so, definitely adults. They didn't wave or signal for help or anything like that, just kept dragging the bag further away from the road. At that point, I got this sudden thought that maybe they would notice me slowing down and try to remember my license plate or something, so I sped back up and I kept driving. The whole thing lasted maybe, 4 or 5 seconds, but it stuck in my head the rest of the drive there to work that day, and the first explanation that I tried to tell myself was illegal dumping. People do dump trash in wooded areas all the time. But then I kept thinking about the details. If they were dumping trash, where was the car or the truck that they brought it in on? That bag also looked heavy enough that it would be really inconvenient to carry it a long distance on foot. And if they had walked it there, how far had they been dragging it before I saw them? By the time that I got closer to work, I was getting more uncomfortable about the situation. I started checking my mirrors constantly because I had this sort of dumb fear that some car was going to suddenly appear behind me. There wasn't anything back there, though. I ended up pulling into a gas station about a mile from my workplace and sat in the parking lot for a minute just to calm myself down. I kept scanning the road to see if any cars passed that might have come from that direction, but nothing ever did. When I got to work, I did end up filing a report with the local police in the end. I didn't call emergency services or anything because, technically I hadn't really seen a crime happen. I just sort of wrote down the location, the time, and what I saw, and I gave it to them. Now, I have no idea if anyone ever followed up on it, but the more I think about that bag, I must say, the more I really do think that it was human-shaped, or body-shaped, I guess you could say. The weirdest part for me, though, was the rest of the morning. I tried eating the breakfast sandwich that I bought, but my appetite was completely gone now. Even driving home later that day, I caught myself staring into the woods when I passed that same stretch of road. I didn't see the guys again, and there was nothing obvious on the road, either side. Like I said, this is pretty recent, so I don't know if anyone's been out there to check on this report that I made, but if anything comes from it, I'll be sure to let you guys know. I'm sharing this because, well, I need to get it out. I've lived quietly with these experiences for like 8 years now. I'm 25 and I've had time to unpack what I believe I compartmentalized during a rough period of my life. So, I moved into this complex when I was 17, almost 18. I often disagreed with my godmother, who I lived with at the time, and so my best friend Sarah suggested that I move in with her family in their 3-bedroom apartment. It was by no means spacious, but in my young mind it was leaps better than the homophobia I was living with currently. Sarah's unit was one of the bigger and nicer ones, and I was already familiar with the complex, as her mother was assistant to the complex manager. We often spent the night in empty apartments neighboring hers. The empty units were already spooky to me as a teen, but even then I chalked it up to just the eerie vibe of a room with no furnishings. Now, there were a few things that were strange. One of the apartments had a doorbell that would ring at random times of the day and night, despite the doorbell system for the complex being broken and eventually even disabled. But that certainly could be chalked up to faulty wiring, so whatever, right? The other empty unit was more transient. People moved in and out frequently, so we spent less time in that unit, although I do have many fond memories of sleepovers there. When we did stay in that unit, though, we were never able to get the family dog to come in. She would just stand in the doorway shaking. Although it was creepy, in my mind, she was just being a nervous dog, and labs can be weird like that. Anyway, when I moved in, I didn't realize how odd it was at first, not for at least maybe about 4 months. I was too caught up in the excitement of living with my best friend. I turned 18 and we spent most of our time out of the complex anyway, either at college or with friends. The time that I did spend at home, it was always lively, full of good food and smells and incense. I loved it. The first time I think I noticed something strange, I didn't really think too much of it at all. Banging came from the wall of the unit next to us, and I remembered complaining to Sarah that they were being awfully noisy. It was mid-afternoon though, and seeing as how it was new noises, I figured that someone had moved into the unit. The banging would continue through the weeks, but when it got too loud, Sarah and I would bang back and it would always quieten down. It would always stay quiet long enough to no longer be on the forefront of our minds, as we assumed that the neighbor got our message. I worked as a weekend and holiday receptionist at the time so that I could continue my schooling without stress. And for Thanksgiving, Sarah and her family chose to visit extended family. I was working, so I ended up staying home, and I had no apprehension about this whatsoever. In fact, I was sort of looking forward to it. I love alone time, as I am naturally a bit of an introverted person anyway. I have no issue being home alone, especially not when I had a dog and a cat to keep me company too. That day I went to work, came home, did my schoolwork, ordered pizza, and eventually I went to bed. When I woke up, it was to the cat yowling and hissing. I had left the lamp on in our room, but outside the window was pretty dark, so I knew it was still early morning. I didn't check what time it was, and honestly, as a dumb teenager, it didn't even occur to me to grab a weapon or assume somebody might have broken in. All I heard was the cat freaking out, and then I realized the dog too, low growling and snarling. I wasn't scared at first, just sort of confused. Then I rounded the hallway to face the living room, and suddenly the hair was raising on my arms. The cat was arched, yowling, staring at the dog. The dog had her ears back, fur raised, hunched as she growled at the corner of the living room. The way our unit was set up, the walls of the living room faced two areas: the empty hallway connecting all the apartments, and two windows that faced the balcony. I was sure that there was no one out there because I had left all the lights on and could see clearly out onto the porch. I told the dog to come and see, but she wouldn't even look at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she barked. I tried to touch her, calm her down, but she just growled even louder at that. Honestly, it freaked me out, and being home alone as a young teenage woman, I did the stupid, maybe smart, I guess, decision to go back to bed and act like nothing had even happened. I left all the lights on after that, and the next morning, I felt comfortable enough to just laugh about it with Sarah on the phone. She agreed that it was strange, but we didn't have much else to say about it, really. So, the unit across from us had two tenants move in during the time that I lived there. The first woman I didn't know. She would talk to Sarah's mother, though, so through them I learned that she had been suffering horribly from sleep paralysis. It was an offhand comment she made one day, and honestly, I didn't really think too much about it. Then the next tenant moved in. She had closer relations to Sarah and her younger sister. After a few months of living there, she quickly moved out, though, experiencing boyfriend troubles. Not before mentioning to Sarah, though, that she had been experiencing sleep paralysis too, in the same back room, with a reoccurring nightmare she described as knowing something was behind the door but being frozen and unable to look. This is normal for sleep paralysis, obviously, but the way that it was the same room and the way that the tenants had never known of each other, or talked even, it was very strange, and at this point I had lived in this complex long enough to start to feel a little bit uneasy, I guess. I was grateful that we only ever slept in the living room for all of those sleepovers, but the nail in the coffin to this particular unit happened about a month or so later. You see, Sarah and I were looking to move out. We wanted our own space, and we were debating on the unit across from us. At $800 in 2016, utilities paid, it was pretty much unbeatable. Sarah, though, more spiritual than I was, brought over a family friend who claimed to be sensitive one day to test the place out. Sarah never once mentioned the last tenant's accounts to her, and the woman, she made two very disturbing comments in that unit. She called the living room a vortex of depression, her words, upon entering. And in the back bedroom, where both tenants had stayed, she claimed that she was unable to look at the entity behind the door. Sharing this even now still gives me chills, because how did she know that? I am the first to call hoax or scam to spooky accounts. Science and the human brain can do weird things, but this was just downright chilling. In the end, we didn't move into that unit. Now finally, one hot summer day, I was home with Sarah's younger sister watching TV. There was a knock at the front door to the complex, so I went out into the hall to greet a man in an official uniform and badge. He introduced himself as a detective, asked if Sarah's mother was around. I said no and asked if I should take a message. He said that he was investigating a reopened cold case from the 80s where a woman had been strangled in a unit here. The unit, right next to ours, touching walls with our bedroom. Apparently, the killer had hopped the border to Canada, and now that he was back in the US, they were hoping to get him. I relayed the message later and then asked who lived in that unit now. The banging on the walls, it never stopped, and I could hear movement in that unit, I swear to it. But Sarah's mum insisted that there was no tenant. I had no way of knowing this at the time, but the articles that came out later revealed that a woman had been taken hostage in her apartment, hog-tied with clothing, and then strangled. Her killer hopped the Canadian border and was caught killing another couple, which means that for over 10 months, I had been sleeping just mere meters from the echoes of a horrific murder scene. I hated that complex. I moved out about 3 months later with nothing much of note happening, but when I think back on it, I wonder about the area. The cold case of the strangled woman. The complex was right next to a bridge, which was so notorious for people jumping off that they installed a security fence 2 years after I moved out. The only time I ever lived in that area again, it was a rental house directly across the bridge. I had horrible night terrors there and moved out about 9 months later due to an abusive relationship. I've never felt any urge to go back to that complex, and when I spend too much time thinking about it, I always get a bit nauseous. Even halfway through sharing this, my hands are shaking. I've never experienced anything paranormal ever again, and honestly, I really don't want to either. I don't want to believe in ghosts, but whenever I go to proudly boast that, the memory of that complex literally haunts me and always makes me swallow my own words. For some context, I live about 30 minutes out of the city in a wooded area. Closest neighbors are about 2 to 3 miles down the road. And this could have very well been a human, which is a lot more scary to me, to be honest, but I'm really not so sure. I thought that I would share this here as it very much felt paranormal and made my hair stand up. So last night, I was woken up by my dog crying at the back door. I look at the time and it's about 3:30 in the morning. I think to myself, that's weird, as he never needs to be let out at this time. I get up and turn on the porch lights and let him out. He was hesitant to go out when I opened the door, which was also weird for him, but I watch as he runs over to the back fence and starts barking. This wasn't his normal bark too. He basically sounded like Cujo, alarmed. As I've never seen him that distressed, I open the door and call out to him to come back inside. This was when I hear it. Whistling, but it sounded like someone whistling a song. I don't see anything at this point, but still freaked out because, well, I'm not sure who the heck would be out at my property at this time, let alone at all, really. I'm desperately trying to get him to come in, but he's fixated on whatever he's barking at. I run to the kitchen to grab his treats, hoping to bribe him inside. I come back to the door and I hear someone or something barking back at my dog, but in a high-pitched voice. In fact, it sounded like when a human barks like a dog, if that makes sense. I look towards where the noise is coming from and can barely make out what looked like, I don't know, glowing eyes staring out from the forest. The whistling starts again for a moment, from that direction too, and as soon as I shook his treats and called out to him, I hear a very loud and deep growl. Not from my dog, definitely not from my dog. It didn't sound human either, but that noise sounded like a very mad, very large animal or something like that. My dog comes running in through the door, straight past me and his treats, right into his crate. I slam the door behind him and lock it, brought him into the room with me, and barricade us in there till daylight. Now, I could reason that the growling could be a bear or maybe a mountain lion, but what was the whistling and the human-like barking? I'm really not sure what it was, but it was enough to scare my dog to the point where he was trembling and panting. He's a German Shepherd and he's a big brave boy most of the time. In fact, I've never really seen him that upset. I'll admit too that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. I will admit too that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. When I was around 8 years old, I went on a weekend camping trip with a big group of people, mostly boys around my age and their dads. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee, so I crawled out of the tent without waking anyone up. Our tents were in a big clearing, so I walked over to the tree line to find a spot, but that's when I noticed something weird. All of a sudden, the forest went, well, quiet. I remember noticing specifically that I couldn't even hear the leaves crunching underneath my feet anymore, even though I could feel them as I walked. And a moment later, I walked up on some sort of spirit that looked like a man in robes standing on top of a stump. He had a glowing light around him, and his facial features were blurred like there was a haze around his face. Weirdly, I wasn't scared at all, and we talked and stayed there together for a while. When I finally walked out of the tree line back to the camp, one of the chaperones immediately ran up to me, saying that they'd been looking for me for a long time, hours in fact, and asking where I had been for so long. I was confused by that because that conversation felt like all of 10-15 minutes. I told him that I had to use the bathroom and met an angel in the woods. He just kind of dismissed it and he sent me back to my tent. To this day, too, I wish so badly that I could remember what we talked about, but I have no idea. All I do remember is meeting him. As a kid, I didn't think twice about it and continued my camping trip like nothing even happened. It wasn't until I was older, looking back on the experience, that I realized just how strange it all was. Has anyone ever had something happen to them like this? And if you have, what was it? I lived in the mountains my whole childhood, and when I was 12, I was friends with these sisters that lived one cul-de-sac over. The roads were separated by a patch of trees, and I would walk through them to go to play with them. And one day, my dad and I were invited to a barbecue at their house. That evening, me and the sisters and their friends, we were jumping on the trampoline in the backyard when the younger sister started acting weird. When asked, she said that she was seeing something on the far side of the next-door neighbor's fence every time that she jumped. One by one, we all tried it, and we all could see, well, something. At first, we dismissed it as the neighbor's big fluffy dog. We went inside to tell the neighbor that his dog might have gotten out and went upstairs to the sister's room. But while up there, they started telling us about a skeletal figure that would enter their room at night and watch them. The younger sister told us about one time she threw a pillow at it and it hit the figure, and about how they think that it gets up there by climbing the gutter pipe next to their window. We all went quiet because we were scared, of course, when we heard like a clicking outside the window that clearly sounded like metal. Of course, we all dashed out of the door and downstairs to the adults because we were thoroughly freaked out. I had my dad carry me home because I was too scared to look into the dark woods. But even then, I didn't fully believe them, until they moved away a week later, and I saw the thing myself. It was late evening, and I was heading inside after playing in the woods, when I saw it peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked like a skeleton, except sharper, with spiky protrusions around its joints, and it had red pinprick lights in its hollow eye sockets. I pretended that I didn't see it, and I just hurried inside. That night, I woke up to something scratching at the wall under my window. In fact, I would wake up multiple times a week to the scratching. It was like something was trying to get my attention, so I would look outside, and exactly what spot I was hearing the scratching coming from was tall enough for an adult human to reach their arms up at. And this entity, it was adult human-sized for sure. I never did look, I was too scared, but the scratching happened for years until I moved out of that house. And that wasn't the only time that I saw the thing in the woods, but I never saw it again after I moved, so it must consist there or whatever. I don't tell this story a lot because people always dismiss it as just a deer, but that would have had to have been one consistent deer scratching at my wall 3 to 4 times a week for at least 3 years straight, which to me, that just doesn't add up. It was 2007 and I was 13. The new SmackDown 5 Raw WWE game had just come out, and I went into my small town on a Sunday morning to purchase it. After purchasing the game, I was in awe of the cover and the synopsis on the back of the game, so I sat on a bench to read it and take in the excitement of buying this new game. I lived in a small market town in England, so Sundays were often very quiet. While sitting on the bench, I looked over to the bus stop across the road and noticed a strange-looking, scraggly man walking towards me. I was a bit nervous seeing this because, although I was 13 or 14, I looked about maybe 11 as I was very small. On his approach, he asked me, "What's that you're holding?" I explained it was my new game. I then said, "Look, I need to go to my brother. He's waiting for me in the mall." Although he wasn't, I felt like I needed to say this just to get away. As I walked off, the man began to follow me, asking my name, my age. I replied Lee, which was a fake name, and told him a fake age. On entering the mall, I started walking quicker and quicker, but I didn't want to start running for some reason I wanted to save face, I guess, but he kept asking if I had a girlfriend, and as he got closer, I noticed he had a scar down his face and also lots of jewelry on. To his question, I responded yes, as I thought it may put him off if he knew that I had a girlfriend. I then ran into a shop in the mall and started flicking through the magazines, but he persisted with the questions. I then got up the courage to run as fast as I could, but he began to chase me. Eventually, I got away, and when I got home, I didn't tell my parents and I just went upstairs and played my game, but later that day I told my mum and she called the police immediately. I then had to go to a police station local to myself and tell them what happened and pick him out of a number of photos the police had on a laptop. And when I found him, apparently this man had kidnapped and done many terrible things to many young boys. And I was just lucky enough to have escaped him. So my house has, for as long as I can remember at least, had major levels of paranormal activity. It's an old farmhouse that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property too. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, it definitely has its stories. My grandma died in what would later become my nursery. My great-grandfather fell out of the hayloft back in the 1920s. They found an old unmarked grave left from the Civil War that got left behind in the 70s, etc., etc. Activity is as common as a housefly around here, really. Cabinets and doors open and shut, things get moved, footsteps in the hall when nobody else is home, figures in doorways. We hear a voice in the old grain silo sometimes, which is impossible because if someone was in there, that they'd suffocate. None of it feels or acts malicious, so I guess we're just used to it, and sort of take it on the chin for the most part. I'm so used to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night because I just thought that it was the normal activity. I was in my brother's room, fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. Knocking is sort of normal here, but it's usually inside. But in the end, I just went ahead and ignored it. This went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before my dog started growling really loudly. So loudly, in fact, that I could hear him from across the house. He really doesn't growl at anything besides the basement door, so I thought that was a bit weird, and I went to go and calm him down in the living room. I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it, you're going to break the handle," because that's just the sort of thing that we say when something is getting particularly rough. And maybe 30 seconds later, I hear the door swing open, and without really thinking about it, I yelled, "I'm pretty sure I told you to knock it off." And I didn't realize anything was actually wrong until a voice that I didn't recognize cursed super loud and the door slammed shut. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. So, yeah, essentially, just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out that it wasn't them after all making the noise. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. So I and my cousin's family were staying in our summer cabin. The cabin is placed on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill there's a lake with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing that you could really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake and boats. It was maybe 9 p.m. when me, my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins, and their dad decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt, and mum decided not to go because it was getting late. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze a bit, and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog out with us. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and we started talking. After about maybe an hour, the conversation had sort of fizzled out a bit, but it was nice and quiet. And suddenly I started feeling a bit off and just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods and the cabin. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried thinking about other things when, from out of nowhere, my dad just says, "Yeah, I'm good." Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion since there was no conversation taking place. Dad looks back at the cabin and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "Yeah, I'm doing good." "What?" she responded, confused. "You asked me how I was doing, so I answered," Dad said. "I didn't ask you anything," my cousin said. Dad looked confused and then said that he had felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello, how are you?" He described feeling whatever it was breathe on his neck and put a hand on his shoulder. He thought that it was my mum at first and turned around but didn't see anything, so assumed it was someone here. But right after explaining this, the 2 dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting towards the woods. We all freaked out, put out the fire, and we started running towards the cabin. And yeah, we haven't gone outside the cabin when dark ever since then, and it's a memory that I'll never forget. Whatever it was nice enough, I suppose, to ask how Dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. But if anyone has any idea as to what this could have been, then please do comment, because I would love to know. The only thing that I can think of is Swedish nature spirits called Vitra that play tricks on people, but according to some people can burn down buildings as well, or capture people if they're bothering them. In other words, they aren't really known for being nice, so I don't know. This happened when I was around 15 to 16 years old. My best friend and some of my classmates, they smoked a bit, like 10 to 11 p.m. at night, before my best friend and I split together from the rest of the guys to go and get some munch at a gas station. Behind the gas station, there was a lake with some benches where we chilled with some joints and enjoyed our hamburgers. Then suddenly we saw this guy, or maybe a better word is being, from the other side of the lake, like 500 meters away, pacing back and forth at the shore, kind of staring at us or eyeballing us like we'd kill his mum or something. He was very erratic, pacing back and forth, and eyeballing us like I said, when all of a sudden this guy dives into the lake and starts swimming toward us. Keep in mind, this is in Norway, and it was between November and December, and it was absolutely freezing outside. Like our fingers hurt from holding the joint sort of cold. While this guy was swimming toward us, we see him doing the butterfly swim method, but this guy is swimming so quickly, like a medium fast-paced jogging speed almost. While we're seeing this guy, we were just sort of WTFing to each other. Like, what is this guy doing? And he keeps getting closer and closer. We start to freak out a bit. And he was around 100 meters away when we just ran for our lives, like running as if there was a lunatic out there and we were in danger. And after like 30 to 40 minutes of running, we just split off and we ran home. Now, this story had me thinking for quite some time that, I don't know, maybe we were just high, but we all saw the same thing, which seems very unlikely. My friend and I talked about this today, and it was really so eerie to talk about this with him when everyone else that I talked to, it just sounds like a crazy guy, but we have no idea what it was. I mean, it looked like a person and, well, humanoid at least, but the ability to swim so quickly across 500 meters like that, in like 0 to 3 degrees Celsius water, is just kind of impossible. I'm one of those people, as far as I know anyway, who has never had a single paranormal encounter. Whenever I tell this story to people, though, they always believe otherwise. So I was very small, definitely not older than 7 years at the max. I was playing in my backyard as usual during the day, and there's this concrete wall that separates our property from my neighbors, who happens to be my uncle. The wall was like broken down on one part, and you could easily go through it to my uncle's side. But you'd have to walk through almost half a mile of weeds and tall grass to get there. I knew that there were rats and some trash there too, so I just never really went back there, though I did play near the wall quite a lot. Now one day, I was doing just that while my mum talked to my grandparents in the kitchen. I couldn't see them, but they could see me and were close enough to hear. Anyway, I was near the broken part of the wall when this other little girl appears out of nowhere on the other side. She was super friendly and looked a little older than me, I guess. I remember her vividly, wearing oversized bright blue jean overalls and a pretty straw hat. I remember describing her to my mum as farmer clothes, and it made sense since this happened to be in summer. She looked like a Sarah Kay illustration from the clothes, but she was very pale, had freckles and straight kind of shoulder length, but maybe longerish hair, I guess. I have no recollection of what we talked about or what we played, but that's what we did for like several minutes. She told me her name was Margarita. She was really fun to be around, but I remember feeling weird about the fact that she wouldn't ever come to my side of the backyard, yet was very insistent that I went to where she was. Of course I wouldn't because of the rats and the trash, and that I was very certain I wasn't allowed to go there too. I remember though explaining this to her and her looking sort of disappointed that I should ask my mum first. Now this next part I remember very well. She insisted that my mum would be okay with it, that there's nothing bad like rats behind the wall and that I shouldn't be afraid. Mind you, she didn't seem angry about my objections. She just seemed sort of annoyed that I wouldn't just trust her. That made me feel very self-conscious, enough to say that I'd go, but I still should tell my mum first anyway. I don't remember her reaction to that, but I thought that she would be happy that I said yes in the end. So I run back inside and explain to my mum the situation. She's understandably weirded out since that wall is not connected to the street or anything, and the only other girls who would go there beside me didn't fit the description at all. My cousin was 2 years younger and not at all like the girl that I described. The other neighbors were too far away and their kids didn't look anything like that either. But I remember she paused and starts talking in a way kid me is sure that she thinks that I'm playing. But I assure her, slightly offended, that Margarita wasn't imaginary. So we go outside so that we can meet her. I run back outside so I get there first, and the whole thing couldn't have taken any longer than a minute, but I don't see her anymore. Of course, I start calling out to her, thinking that she must be behind the wall, shy maybe. My mum then begins talking like one does to a kid's imaginary friend. She's talking at nothing. I'm annoyed as heck at this point. Even writing this I am, because I know that I didn't make her up. I started looking around for her, but my mum was growing impatient, and she didn't like that I was about to go behind the wall because I'm not allowed to, which annoyed me more because I knew that, but now it looked like I didn't. I expected her to come back the next day, but after that, I never saw Margarita again, which I can see is probably one of the reasons why my mum thought that I made her up. It's more of a grandma name than a kid's, I suppose. Anyway, my mum surely noticed that I was expecting to see her again, so she acted like Margarita was there already. I felt like I had an imaginary friend forced upon me, and I was still sad and angry, and I couldn't prove I was saying the truth, but I guess I was just too little and easy to influence, so I too kind of made myself believe that I had an imaginary friend named Margarita. Just that, now that she was imaginary, she wasn't the girl that I saw, because I did, and instead a big butterfly like that one butterfly Pokemon that I liked. I knew that she was imaginary, unlike the real Margarita that I met that day, and felt a bit silly playing with her, but it also felt nice and comfortable, so I had Margarita, the Pokemon rip-off butterfly, in my mind for a couple of years. But I never did forget about the real one and the feelings of my mum not believing me again. Every time I told this story, it was around the topic of my mum not believing me, but everyone always acted spooked by it. Over the years, I started to feel a bit spooked myself too, I'll admit. But who knows? Maybe I'm still too easy to influence, and I just don't know if it was real or not. Being of Middle Eastern descent, and growing up later in Western Canada, I remember faintly when we lived for a time in Saudi Arabia, where my dad was a contracted architectural engineer for a large American weapons company, where he designed and built foreign employee offices, living quarters, and buildings for the testing compounds in the harsh Saudi desert with other engineers from across the Middle East and Europe. The company that he worked for was none other than Raytheon, a well-known merchant of death that had dealings with the emirs of the land, who were swimming in black oil and luxury, and were the de facto government at the time. I remember meeting some of them too, who were rather pleasant and came with toys and candies for me and my siblings whenever they would come to our house to socialize and make their plans with my father. Little did I know, my father would tell me years later, in the comfort of our Vancouver apartment of course, that these men in their immaculate one-piece suits were quite ruthless businessmen with killers and spies in their employ. We had hosted men who were cousins, uncles, and brothers to the Saudi royals. They had toppled governments and raised up armies and militias and even terrorist groups all across the Middle East and Africa. My dad had one colleague that could build a bomb from common items in your fridge and under your sink that could level a building, and that he learned this from intelligence agencies that will remain unnamed. I was about 6 years old when we left for Canada in the early 90s, but I remember our time there, an old brick bungalow house we had lived in, a large accommodation with a sandy yard. It was a sparse neighborhood. There were other houses, but not close enough to be in each other's business or hear your neighbors' noises. Most of the people living in this area were in the employ of the royal family in some capacity. They were well off, educated, and well connected. There were several empty houses around as well that I would sometimes roam around and explore, if I found the opportunity to escape the confines of our home, that is. Now, I had heard of the jinn early on from my mother as warnings against bad behavior, or when she wanted to scare me with images of beastly ghouls. She would say that they appeared in many forms as shadows, humanoid chimera-like beings with hooved feet and tails, as transparent ghosts, or as invisible unseen forces even. She said that they could also appear as humans and that they were great mimics. They could lure you into places with the voices of people that you knew. She would also say that they liked waiting until you slept, as they could enter your dreams for unknown reasons. Many times she would also ascribe any possibly paranormal or odd goings-on to the jinn. For example, if one heard unexplained noises from an empty room, or even if objects were lost, thoroughly looked for, and later found in area searched several times, well, that was them, playing their tricks. She would often say a prayer against them and or curse them either in the singular, shaitan, or in the plural, shayatan. My mother would alert me against going to the abandoned or empty houses, for she warned me that these are the places that the jinn would occupy, waiting for wayward souls to attach to and torture. My father, being a rather pragmatic man, told me to never mind her stories, to just go and explore, but to be careful of strangers and not to be gone for too long. Now, she told me that once, when I was 3 years old, I was sleeping in my room at night, and she had cause to check up on me after being washed over with a foreboding feeling, a creepy sensation that she needed to see that I was okay. Upon entering my room, she said that there was a black shadow in the corner near my bed, that she saw it clearly for a split second, and not only saw but also felt, and she flipped the light switch on, and it just dematerialized instantly. Being scared for her child, she spent several nights in my room with me before she brought a holy man to cleanse the space and say some prayers. After which, she said that there were not any more occurrences of shadows looming over her children, and she seemed satisfied with that. I don't recall ever seeing any moving shadows or ghouls in that part of my life, but there was something later, in my late teens, several occurrences of, well, what I can term as shadow people appearing. We had moved to British Columbia by this time, were awarded citizenship for some years. I was finishing high school, well adjusted, lots of friends at school and even in the building that we lived in. My two brothers and sister were friends with all the other kids and teens who also lived in our building, and the neighbouring apartments as well. This was in the early 2000s, before kids had cell phones or even spent time on computers really. We were always doing something outside in groups, having fun and just causing a ruckus. In fact, I don't even think a day was spent inside. If we could help it, we didn't need money or reason to just roam about at the very least, and more often than not, we had our regular haunts and meet-up spots. I remember one particular night though. I was maybe 17 or perhaps 18, where I had an experience that was quite jarring and was also shared with my brother. So I had been sleeping and woke up, paralyzed, unable to move or speak, but to my horror, there was sitting in this chair beside my bed a shadow man with red eyes. His energy was malevolent and contemptuous. He didn't speak, just sat there, and even though I couldn't see a mouth, I knew that he was grinning. I could sort of see the outline of it. He was definitely a man, but just made of shadow that my eyes couldn't see through. He was watching me struggle to break my paralysis for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. Obviously, I was terrified and couldn't keep a straight thought in my head, but I was trying to somehow run away, even though it was impossible. I remember making mewling noises and moaning, trying to scream, but everything was paralyzed. Even though my mouth was agape and I couldn't shut it, I still couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but try to scream, and it was just coming out as muffled noises. In that moment, I could feel that this shadow being was deriving pleasure from my anguish. He was just sitting there, about 4 feet away from me, as clear as anything else in the dark room, just staring at me with those red eyes. Then, all of a sudden, he stood up, belched out an evil chuckle, and zipped away in the direction of my brother's room down the hall. He flew at an alarming speed. Weirdly, too, I could see 2 trails of red light as his eyes left along with the shadow body, at which point I snapped out of my paralysis. As soon as he left my room, the paralysis, it broke. All I could focus on was his laugh before he left, and honestly, I thought that it was over, that this thing zipped away out of the apartment back to, well, wherever it is that it came from. At that, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. I was shaken up, I'll admit, but I was convinced that this was just a weird, vivid dream of some sort. It did feel real, as normal as life in fact, as real as talking to another person. And I mean, I definitely seemed to be awake. I wasn't sleeping. But while I stood there slowly drinking my cold water, I heard the same muffled screams that I was making coming from somewhere down the hall. It was coming from the last room, my middle brother's room. I walked over there and listened by his door, and yes, he was making noises, so I opened his door and I froze as I saw a portion of the air on top of him was dark, darker than the already dark room. It was like a cloud was sort of hanging over him, and he looked sort of paralyzed like I was, and he was moaning exactly like I was too. I can only describe it as sort of silently screaming, but I ran over and shook him awake. It took a few seconds, but I shook him hard and eventually he came to. He looked at me with eyes wide in fear and said that there was a shadow man with red eyes laughing at him while he made him frozen. He said that he woke up paralyzed as this shadow man came into the room, and this thing was standing above him the whole time laughing and just watching him struggle. Honestly, I could barely believe it. I told him that it just happened to me too, and that I heard him from the kitchen. I told him how it left my room and went in the direction of his room after it let me go, and both of us had trouble sleeping that night. It was the most surreal experience that I've ever had. This was the first time any paralysis happened to him as well, and the first time anything like this event had ever happened. He wasn't into any paranormal stuff, and it was a shock to him that things like this could even happen. He never took my mother's story seriously, I suppose. He was always just as level-headed and grounded as my father. Unlike me, I did have an interest in these things, and UFOs, ghosts and the such. But I also remember this as a shocking first time. It was sort of an assault on my reality, even if I was open-minded to the paranormal. In any case, we told our mum about it the next day, and she immediately blamed a jinn. She was reminded of the time that she saw a shadowy presence in my room back in Saudi Arabia. We couldn't stop her from praying in our rooms and lighting her incense to clear the bad air. And it must have worked as, well, I never felt that presence return. But it certainly wasn't the last time that I saw a shadow being. It was never as blatant and in your face as the first time, but it happened many times more. I've told this story to many people and shared it online even, and have never heard of a case where the shadow being attacked two people consecutively. So, was this just a case of sleep paralysis hallucinations? But how did me and my brother share this delusion if that's truly what it was? To this day, we still talk about it. I had many other sleep paralysis encounters with shadow beings, but never like that first time, never as malevolent, and never again shared with another person. In fact, I get sleep paralysis quite often now, even had it last night, but I haven't had a shadow being during these times in 20 years or more. I guess I've just become used to it now, waking up, unable to move, and have learned to keep calm until it passes, which it always does in a minute or so. There were many other times I've seen the shadow people during waking hours, fleetingly in the peripherals of my vision darting by, as have others I know. Other times I've seen them when entering a dark room before turning a light on, after which they always disappear. I guess I just got used to them, I suppose. They seemed fairly harmless, and eventually I just stopped noticing them. I figured after some time and study that they, most likely being jinn, were just sort of living their lives, and that the veil that separates our lives from theirs can become thin, rendering them somewhat visible or lets their presence be felt. Reading about jinn as much as I could, I have learned that they have lives like we do. They have children apparently, duties, can be good and tolerant, or, well, downright mean. Some are interested in pranks, some can grant boons, and some can possess you even. But I have read that possessions are exceedingly rare. I've even read that they have religions. They can believe in God. Being shapeshifters, their most common form is a shadow in the shape of a human. But perhaps that's also the most common way that our minds can grasp them. Maybe our eyes can only catch them in a certain visual frequency or something. They have their favorite dwellings but can appear anywhere, which means that they're not locked in a location in ways that ghosts or spirits can be. One night, when I was maybe 19 or 20, I had an encounter on the Blue Line train in Los Angeles that still haunts me to this day. So I was waitressing in downtown Long Beach and worked the closing shift. I was on the train around midnight, heading towards Los Angeles. It was just me and one other man on the train. I had my headset on, minding my own business, and he was sitting in front of me with his hood up. Everything was fine too until we neared Watts, California. The man, he got up, walked to the train doors, and as they opened, he turned back to look at me, and that was when I saw it. He had no face, no features, no eyes, no lips, no mouth, just pure blackness under the hood. He walked off the train, and I felt like my heart almost fell out of my body. 20 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I saw that day. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Or do you have any ideas as to what this could have been? This happened about 2 hours ago. So I, a 26-year-old female, and my boyfriend, 36 and male, decided to go to the store to get some oil. We have to go out 45 minutes just to get this out in a bad part of the city, but it's the only European store that has the actual stuff that I grew up with eating. My family and I are from the Ukraine but live in the US, and it's difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had, and this is the only place that I've found that has it down to the exact brand. Anyway, as we're driving, we're on a 3-lane road, which we need to get into one of those mid-section U-turn type of lanes. We get into our left turn lane, and a black car blitzes from the far right lane through the middle lane to cut us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I are like, what the heck? And then they stop at the green light for the U-turn. My boyfriend gently honks twice in a nice way in case they were on the phone to go since the light is now green. They go forward and we go to the parking lot directly on our right to the store that we need to go to. The car in front of us, which was now on our far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and drives onto the sidewalk to go into the parking lot that we were going into, and rides nearly on our bumper, pressing their horn the entire time that we drove. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it, and at that point, I realized that his car camera was not on. I can't remember the name in English, but it's a camera that records in front and back as you drive. I tap it since usually it starts recording when it feels motion. It didn't turn on, and we realized that it somehow was disconnected on the car. As he's trying to get the camera plugged back into the car, the black car pulls up, and I see 3 guys looking 18 to 20 in there. All 3 are African American. They roll their window down, and the driver then reaches for something, about to take out something, and I'm screaming at my boyfriend, just drive, go, just go. And my boyfriend slammed onto the gas pedal. We drove off, and that black car does too. My boyfriend suddenly began doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car to back off while I'm screaming, oh my goodness, the police, call the police, I need to call the police, and managed to dial 911 as he was doing his last donut, and then suddenly began driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us out as I finally got an answer, and when the police asked where we were, I sort of blanked out and stuttered in panic that we were currently being chased, and my boyfriend yelled out what road we were passing. He used to do Uber for like 7 years, and he knows every street name by heart pretty much. The guys, though, they kept going after us until we were about 3 or 4 blocks away from the police station. We stayed on the line, and they probably realized what we were doing and swerved to a random road on our left. At some point, we got disconnected, but the officer called me right back and stayed with us as we pulled into the station. We explained what happened, and the officer was nice. He offered to escort us back to the store following our car in case the guys were still there. We showed the skid marks, and The officer said nice as a bit of a joke. It was all good in the end, and he did paperwork as we grabbed the sunflower oil that I really wanted, and had my boyfriend try authentic Slavic ice cream for the first time, which he agrees is 100% better than the American stuff. And we decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and we went home. My boyfriend said that he was amazed at how quickly I made all the right decisions and was actually surprised I even called the police because he's aware that I have a history of being, SA'd by 2 on-duty officers 4 years ago, and I've been too terrified to call or speak to officers since then. But I was so terrified of getting shot that my only priority was to call the police in the end. I was so terrified that my chest hurt, and I was happy that we were safe. My boyfriend is now laughing, saying that he can now prove front-wheel Dodge cars can do great donuts, but I genuinely hope that I don't run into those 3 guys ever again. This happened quite a few years ago, but I can still remember it like it was yesterday. This wasn't a ghost that I saw maybe out of the corner of my eye for a split second, or from some super far away place. I saw it up close and personal for a solid 5 to 6 seconds, which, when you're seeing a ghost, seems like an eternity. So I was laying on my couch at night, when all of a sudden I see a spectral figure, made of blue light, emerge from around the corner of my hallway and start walking toward me. He was made of light, but he was also sort of transparent as well, so I could see through him. He couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 feet away from me. I was completely floored, perplexed, amazed, shocked, all at the same time. He was in such great detail that I could tell what type of clothing he was even wearing, some type of military garment, and that he was young, an Asian male in his 20s. He had a stoic, somber look on his face, almost sad, I would say. As he walked toward me, he left a trail of undulating blue light behind him that kind of waved up and down. This lasted for a solid 5 or 6 seconds, the entire time my eyes are completely wide open and I can feel my heartbeat start to increase. And as quickly as he came, he then vanished into thin air as he got closer to me. I have never seen anything like it before in my life, and I seriously doubt that I ever will see anything like it ever again. I told my family about it, and they said, "Oh, you've always had a vivid imagination." But it was like, no, I know what I saw. There's no way what I saw wasn't real. I've never believed in ghosts before, thinking that anyone who does has to be certified crazy, but after that night, I truly believe in ghosts and some sort of afterlife. For some weird reason, I didn't feel scared when I saw him or even after. The dominant feeling that I had was just pure amazement and bewilderment to what I had just witnessed. Everyone always says that if or when you see a ghost that it is scary, but that wasn't the case with me at all. So, am I crazy? Has anyone ever seen anything similar? If you have, then please do share your thoughts, because truly, I could use it right now. I was born in Amherst, Ohio, April 7th, 1984. When I lived in Lorain, Ohio in the late 80s, I lived in this 2-story house. It was old, and there's just some things that are in that house that always left me puzzled, and in a bit of a total mystery, I guess. I'm now 40. I've talked about my experiences with other people, but all I get back is snickering, made fun of, or laughed it off as being unbelievable. I've talked about this part of my life the same way, and nothing ever changes my story. Behind our house, my mother and father created this huge, beautiful garden. And between the ages of around 3 to 5 years old, my parents would throw some weekend cookouts. My dad would invite his work or drinking buddies over, and Mum would invite her people as well. The floor model stereo would be out to play in the background, Dad would be socializing with his people, the grill is grilling, my light blue kiddie pool would be filled up with water, our front yard would be out of parking spaces, The driveway was spoken for, so the rest would just have to park their cars in the backyard where we were. Now, one weekend, I decided to walk around the house by myself for some reason. I had no reason for doing so, but I was just walking. I found myself in the front yard alone, so I decided to continue journeying around the house into a full complete circle. When I had done that, I came to a shocking discovery though. Everything and everyone was suddenly gone. I mean, the pool, the stereo, people, cars, even the garden was gone. What was once a garden was nothing but a bed of grass now. But here's the weird thing. I can still hear everyone. Yes, I was awake, I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just seeing things. In dreams, when talking about dreams, you only know about 5% of the dream, and it's all over the place when telling it, right? But in this case, I remember everything. The way that I've explained it here is the way that I've explained it for almost 40 years now as well. Ever since, I've always been convinced that I've found what seemed like a portal, and so I kept doing it. It was the same result every single time. Everything was gone. Sometimes I often wonder what would have happened to me if I had just kept walking circles around the house without stopping. Would I have happened to become a missing persons case, or someone erased from memory altogether? I've recently gone back to that house in Ohio since moving away in the late 80s. I was excited to show my wife and kids the first house that I lived in. I was also excited about the thought of actually getting some answers and putting to bed this mystery. But when approaching the house, all we arrived to was an empty lot. I felt sad, sort of ticked off, and beyond disappointed. All that I have are what seems to be made-up stories, but still I live with this mystery. And that's why I'm here. I would really like to try and get some answers as to what this was. And I'm really hoping that someone somewhere has had something similar happen to them, or has an answer, or at least some thoughts. All are welcome to comment because, like I said, I am completely perplexed. This happened to me and my friend G when I was on my 3rd year of high school after the COVID pandemic and lockdown. Me and G live in the same city. It's really not that big. We had this place that we enjoyed hanging out because there was no one around there. No drunk dudes, no annoying babies and crazy parents. Only a very few people and the calming sound of the grass. It's near the biggest park we have here, so the trail isn't that hidden. Anyway, we used to go there during the summer, but it was around November and it was kind of cold out and we were shaking a bit. But we just wanted to be alone, and I guess the creepy atmosphere was sort of intriguing. We had only one incident the last time that we went there, which I think I'll share here in the future at some point, but he was skipping about going there, but I was a sort of talkative person too, so it wasn't hard to convince him that day. And I kid you not that a few minutes after we entered the trail, somebody's shadow began to block the only way out. This was kind of scary because, it was pitch black, 10:40 p.m. and it was winter, and my phone's light was the only sufficient thing that we had for seeing the silhouette. I think it was a man, definitely not long hair, but I don't know how tall, and I'm not completely sure it was a man. Even though I flashed him with my flashlight from my phone, I still couldn't see the colors of his clothes or body or anything. It was just too dark out and my phone wasn't strong enough, and it had a lightless background. Not even the moonlight was out that night, nor the flame of a lighter that he used could change that as well. It was completely black and he was devoid of color, except for the sort of sub-cattering high of that little flame and my light. He didn't move at all, except when he took the lighter from what I assume was a pocket on him. I was terrified, G was terrified and was grabbing my right arm as if his life depended on it. But no matter how much we were shaking or panicking, that man didn't move. He stood still on the trail without making any type of sound. So I started saying out loud how lucky we were to have brought our knives with us this day, in case we would have found something dangerous. At one point, me and G discussed about calling our parents to take us from there, and that we would have to elaborate a story so that they wouldn't be concerned. But as I turned to watch my phone, G said that we still needed the light on the guy to keep an eye on him, so I immediately raised it in the direction of that man, and I was shocked. G was frantically tapping my arm saying, "He's not there, we need to go," and it was true. In those few seconds, he was out of our vision now, which of course drove us crazy, and prompted us to run faster and faster in the direction from where the streetlights would illuminate everything, making us feel safer. Eventually we got out of the trail, but I could have sworn that I heard someone following us. Of course, I stayed with G for the rest of the evening until we arrived at his house complex. I felt really guilty about getting him to go there that night, and so I accompanied G back home, and it definitely made me feel a little bit better, but I don't know. Maybe it was nothing, and maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe the other person was as scared of us as we were of them. But something tells me that whoever that person was, that they were up to no good, and we just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I have a series of short stories from when I lived in Utah years ago. These stories, they take place in the time period from 2003 to 2014. I originally come from Utah, but haven't lived there in years, and have lived all over the United States since then. So I've lived in lots of places where they have their own histories, hauntings, and interesting stories. So here's the first ones, well, chronologically speaking anyway. So in 2003, my then stepdad, who was and is abusive, controlling, and treated my mother and my siblings and I horribly, began escalating his behavior. I noticed a pattern that, as he got worse, strange things would happen around the house. Like, family members and I would hear disembodied voices throughout the house. A strange presence would be felt at some times and then not at others. And, most notably, we would see shadow figures running around the house. These were not tall, humanoid figures that you typically think of when you think of shadow figures. These were deformed, almost animal or alien in nature, and moved extremely fast and had an almost impish quality to them. We would occasionally hear a man's voice in the house calling our names too, but we left that house and moved to a different neighborhood north of Salt Lake City in Bountiful, Utah. After settling into our new home in Bountiful in August of 2004, other members of the family began noticing strange things too. Footsteps would be heard in the hallways late at night. My mother would be working in her office at her computer and occasionally hear footsteps, and one night she felt something touch her back even. She turned around and there was obviously nobody there. Later, my brother saw an apparition of a young girl wearing white standing at the end of the hallway. Thinking that it may have been one of my sisters, she went to go and check to see if everything was all right, and the girl just disappeared, and my mum saw that both of my sisters were both still sound asleep in their bedrooms. After doing some research into the history of the house, we learned that a young girl had passed away from leukemia in that same house a number of years prior. Her bedroom, it had been the same room that was my mum's office. And the old photo of the girl who passed away matched the appearance of the apparition that my mother saw at the end of the hallway that night. In 2006, as the behavior of my then stepdad began to become even more abusive, so too did the odd occurrences in the home. Our family dog would frequently panic and bark or howl at nothing in the air, especially when in the basement. The paranormal events culminated in a few members of the family, not me though, seeing about a dozen entities, semi-translucent in appearance, and of ghastly appearance as well, surrounding the former stepdad while he was sitting in his chair one evening. In October of that year, around the same time the apparitions were seen, our family dog tragically died by being attacked by a pack of wild animals, either raccoons or coyotes, in the middle of the night. 2007 and 2008, they were pretty quiet years for the most part, and in 2009 the year opens pretty uneventfully, but activity starts ramping up big time in the spring and early summer. On my brother's birthday, in June of 2009, I lived at my grandparents' house with my family, and I was in the front yard waiting for the rest of the family to come out to the car to go for the birthday outings. About maybe 300 yards away, I see a young woman wearing what looked like 1980s punk clothing and her blonde hair in kind of a side ponytail, walking casually down the street and screaming for help. Her voice didn't sound normal though. It sounded much farther away than a mere 300 yards, and it also sounded kind of, I don't know, like dreamy almost. Fair enough, it wasn't a neighborhood with lots of houses and trees, and it was on a hill, so the acoustics weren't what sold it for me, but I immediately went inside and told everyone that there was a girl crying for help down the street. We got in the car and drove up and down the streets looking for her. Keep in mind too that it was midday, everyone else was still at work or school. This was literally a few days before summer vacation. So unless she was a resident, which she wasn't, it was a small neighborhood where everybody knew everyone and she didn't look familiar at all. It was unlikely that she could have just disappeared or gone somewhere before we reached her. I later learned that a young lady matching her description died of a drug overdose in the 1980s in that very neighborhood. That same month, in 2009, my family and I went to a cinema to see Monsters vs. Aliens, which had come out in March of that year and was still playing in the theaters in June. While my brother and I are watching the movie in our seats, my mum leaves with my sister to go to the restroom, and they come back sort of shaken and terrified. What happened? I asked after the movie. My mum and sisters then tell me that my mum had been picked up and thrown out of her shoes by an unseen force while walking down the hall. Apparently, when she got off the ground, she was 5 feet from where her shoes were, and they were still standing upright in the spot where she had been standing when she fell. Obviously, I wasn't there to confirm this, but still, with how shaken up they actually were, I do believe that something happened. For the years 2010 to 2011, I didn't live in Utah but had experiences elsewhere. 2012 was relatively tame and had little in the way of notable supernatural experiences. In 2013, I didn't live in Utah but had multiple experiences while living in Tennessee. And then the next Utah stories are, in April, I was staying for a few weeks with my grandparents, and my family and grandparents had gone out one day. They were having a fun day outing and doing some shopping or something. This is in the same neighborhood as the story from 2009, by the way, but knowing in our family history that Grandma's house had some strange activity, the previous owner of the house had actually been murdered, we all knew that there was something off about the house. Well, on one particular day, the vibe was particularly off. I was home alone, chilling out, and in no mood for ghosts, and I felt like there was just a very unwelcome and wrong presence in the house. I had a short temper that day and told them to get lost and leave me the heck alone, and called them a series of horrible insults. I sat down to play guitar and unwind a bit, and then from like 30-ish feet away down the hallway, I heard a woman moaning coming from my grandma's room. I was home alone, and after hearing this noise, my blood just ran cold and I froze. Hello? I managed to choke the word out in as stoic and friendly of a voice as I could muster, but there was no response. To keep myself from soiling my pants and running out of the house, I ended up just sort of scoffing and told myself, it's probably just the cat. My grandma had a tabby cat named Lottie at the time, who was one of my best friends. She later passed away in August of that year due to old age, but I had never before or since heard her cat, or any cat, make a noise like that. It was a human noise. I had an experience a few months back that I still can't shake, as well as other interactions. Maybe it was a dream, but I woke up to my husband yelling my name from downstairs. I yelled back, "What?" and he asked, "Are you going to work?" I reached for my phone and it was 1:20 in the morning. That was when I looked over and my husband was sleeping and snoring next to me. Around February, in my room putting clothes away, so fully awake this time, I heard my husband call my name from downstairs and I yelled back and said my name again. I searched the downstairs after he wouldn't respond, but there was no sign of him. I looked outside and I also saw that his vehicle was gone. Now recently, I was sitting on the couch with my son on my lap, husband sleeping on the other couch, one dog on my left, another one at my feet, when I heard a psst noise to call my cat on my left. Both dogs perk up and look towards it. My husband is still sleeping on my right. I woke him up and asked if he heard it, mostly for comfort I suppose, but I asked my son if he heard it too, but both say no. After that, though, I did go through each room in the house and repeated that you are not welcome here, please get out. So far, all has been okay, but I'm still unsure of what I might have been dealing with, and I'm not sure that it's gone too. When my grandfather was young, he helped his father with his line of work, and he often worked in the woods, whether it be helping cut down trees or gathering wood. That's usually where he was. This particular day, they went to this secluded town. When they got there, my grandfather wanted to go and explore the woods a little bit while his father worked. He was warned not to go wandering off too deep into these woods because they were known to be a bit dangerous. However, that's exactly what he did. He ended up getting really lost because he wandered off too far in and he stumbled upon a body of water. Now, this is where it gets a bit weird, and when he told me what occurred here, I could see the absolute fear in his eyes. He told me that a creature, one that was tall and dark, walked out of the swamp. He said that it resembled a woman and had very long hair covering much of her distorted face. She also had a very dark complexion. Whatever it was, it walked out of the swamp and gripped his neck and started to choke him. Then it started to drag him into the water and drown him. He was freaking out obviously and begging for it to let him go, and eventually either it did or he sort of slipped out. By the time that it let him go, he was hysterical though, crying and screaming. It was also nearing dark and somehow his father found him but was confused why his son was so wet. When they went back to town, he explained to the couple who were working with his father what occurred, and they said that they know of that creature. Apparently, a lot of people end up wandering far into those woods and end up dying. They die because that thing apparently drowns them, and my grandfather was very lucky that he was spared. Now, I know that this story might be a little bit difficult to believe, but that's fine. I mean, I believe it because of the look in my grandfather's eyes, who you could see fear in. He's also a very honest man, and I've never known him to be a liar. This all occurred in Morocco back in the 60s, in the northern part of the country. Back when I was a kid, my family and I lived in a pretty old house in Tennessee. The house was built in the 1920s, I believe. It was kind of shaped in a square. Think of a racetrack that you can go around. My sister and I's bedroom door was in the living room and the hallway was to the left. I used to have reoccurring nightmares and sleep paralysis of a tall man with a hat coming down the hallway to my bedroom, and I would always wake up before he came into my room. Textbook sleep paralysis story, I know, but during summer, my mum would leave me and my 3 siblings home alone while she worked. She would come home tired, and since she low-key had a lot of kids, she didn't like us to immediately stampede her when she arrived home. So, one day, we're all sort of chilling in the living room watching TV while our mum was at work. We were just doing the usual. We heard our mum get home from work early that day, and we were pretty happy about that. We heard the back door open, and she came in talking to her friend on her Bluetooth. She always wore these black leather boots, and we heard them sort of clunking on the floor while she walked and talked towards us. When she was finally almost to the living room, she was at the end of the hallway where I told you guys earlier where I used to see the Shadow Man in my dreams. And you can probably guess that when we got up to greet her in that spot, she wasn't there. We were all pretty stunned by that at the time. My sister immediately called her, and you can probably guess again that she was still at work. I didn't tell my brother about the Shadow Man before, but when I did, he said that he had seen him too in the bathroom, which was in the same hallway. My mother also told me once that she used to hear my little brother calling her name when he wasn't even home. Honestly, I really hated that house. My experience starts in New Mexico, west of Clayton on 422. I was drilling for a small mom-and-pop company with a hydraulic rig, which only took 2 people to operate, which was my younger brother and I. It was hot that summer and the rig would overheat. It was always during the day, so I told the boss man that we would drill at night and that way there would be no issues. My little brother had the company truck and I had my personal vehicle, which was a 2003 Tahoe. I also had my girlfriend with me at the time, so we agreed to meet at the job site after dark. We live like an hour away in Texas. Anyway, you would pull off 422 just after the road tees to another small town that I don't know the name of, and you would have to open and close at least 5 gates to get to this spot, some steel and some barbed wire even. When I got there, I fired up the rig and generator, turned on the lights to check equipment. Everything seemed good, so I shut it back down to wait for my brother. I folded the back seat down and I was going to try and sleep for a little bit while my brother was headed out towards us, so me and the girlfriend jumped in the back of the Tahoe to get some shut-eye. And that was when I noticed just how pitch black it was in this pasture. There was no moon or no stars, nothing, just darkness about this time, and I see what looks like headlights at a good distance, far enough that it looked just like one headlight instead of 2 separate headlights, which seemed like they were headed our direction, but not from the direction that we came from a different direction, to the east. I was puzzled by this, and we watched this light come down that appeared to be county roads, still thinking that it was headlights, but it still never got close enough that it split into 2 separate lights. So it was still pretty far away, but anyhow, we're sitting there watching it, head our direction, and all of a sudden it does a spiral move and disappeared, like as if you were to stand outside with your finger, draw a spiral in the air, but imagine it was like 5 miles away. Seeing this, I instantly knew that it was not a car anymore. I look over at her and ask, "Did you see that?" She did and hugs me tightly as we talked about it, trying to wrap our heads around what we just saw. She points out this red glow that's coming toward us though, toward my truck slowly from the east, and honestly, I was in a state of disbelief sitting there quietly, trying to come up with any logical explanation for what this glowing red mist could be. I thought, it must be a brake light. No, the brake pedal is clear of anything that could press it. And the rig and the generator were off. Looking around for anything as a solution, I look over and ask, "Are you seeing this? I'm not tripping or nothing, right?" She said, "No, this is happening. Let's get out of here." I said, "No, let's see what it wants." About that time, this sort of mist surrounded the back half of my Tahoe. Looking out of the window seemed like looking through a red filter, but not just red, almost like an ultraviolet red, a filter but without the black light. She then said, "Let's go now," and I said wait, trying to figure out what was happening. And that's when I heard a knock on the rear passenger quarter panel. It scared the absolute heck out of both of us. She screamed, which made me panic, so I turned around to start my truck up. I couldn't find the key for a split second, but when I did, I put it in and turned the switch on, but nothing happened. Like the battery was dead. No light, no radio. Then, a split second later, the engine would turn over, but still no lights. There was now a second thud on the rear quarter. The truck turned on. We looked around and everything was normal again. The headlights came on, but we left out of there right then and there, and obviously I didn't drill that well. The boss man did, and we ended up meeting my brother at one of the many gates to get on the property. I tried to tell him what had happened, and he said that something had hit his truck too, but brushed it off as a stick or something. I told my boss about it. He thought that I was at drugs, and to this day still believes this, and honestly, I still don't know what the heck it was. I don't think it wanted to harm us because the whole thing just kind of happened. It didn't seem sort of intended, I suppose. Like I just so happened to be in its path, or it wanted to see what the bright lights were way out in the middle of nowhere. Honestly though, that's a wild guess and I really don't know. But I am wondering if anyone has any similar stories to this, or any information on what this could have been. I have wanted to go back and check it out at some point, but also I really don't want to get shot by a rancher, and honestly, I don't want to experience that again either. I have 4 weird experiences from when I was working on ships. The first one was midway across the Atlantic in 2013. Me and a few other cadets, we were on the bridge wing, outdoor part of the wheelhouse, for our celestial navigation project. We saw a light come up from the east, fly at high speed until it was almost directly above us, and make a 90-degree turn and zip over even faster. It was at the altitude that you would expect to see a plane at, but nothing turns when crossing the ocean, and especially that fast. I don't think that people could even survive a turn that quick. Anyway, the second was an animal sighting. This time I was a cadet on another container ship, and we had just left Dutch Harbor, aka heading for Japan. But we were about halfway between the two and the 100s of miles from land. It was choppy and overcast, and the mate and I saw a large school of porpoise and seabirds, which typically would indicate that they were following fish. In the middle of the group, though, we see a huge white fin come up that looks like a whale's paddle fin. It could have been a whale, I admit, but we have never seen anything that big before. The third one, though, was definitely the weirdest. I was out of school and working on a seagoing tugboat in the Gulf of Mexico at the time. I didn't see it, but I came up to stand my watch at 15:45, and the 2 guys up there had weird looks on their faces. One looks to the other and says, "Should we tell him?" I ask, and they proceed to say that they had just watched a beach ball-sized bubble with pulsing lights on the inside fly in front of the boat about 10 feet above water. They said that it was moving against the wind at a constant speed, and the outside of it looked like when there's an oil in a puddle in your driveway. The last one was in the Gulf of Mexico again, and this one was the longest. So me and a few others were sitting in the mess watching TV, and the captain called down on the phone. He asked us if we wanted to see a UFO. We all went up, and 4 of us sat there in the wheelhouse and watched a red light sort of erratically snap from one position to another, a short distance away, for about 2 hours. It would sit in a spot for about 15 to 20 seconds, and then snap to a new position in a straight line and sit there. The best way that I could describe it is that it would be like putting a laser pointer on a wall and jerking it around to a new spot a few inches away. Eventually, though, it just took off at high speed, and, well, that was that. So I worked in the radiology department in a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer, before getting a promotion working in medicine. During these 3 years, I saw a lot of things, ranging from patients dying in the MRI scanners to patients having an X-ray for inserting a meat thermometer into their urethra. Yeah, that's a real thing. Nights always seemed the craziest too, but one time a patient came in with armed police after an altercation which involved a knife in the middle of the city centre, and just so happened that the person he had the altercation with was having an X-ray too. This caused a second altercation right in front of me. Chairs were thrown, a trash bin or two, and then wheelchair even. So I've seen things, some funny, some stressful, some sad, and many bonkers, but this one night, well, it was something scary. So I would start a night shift at about 1900, then would work till about 8:30 in the next morning. This was the standard night shift for our department. We would usually do 3 nights in a row before doing 4 days off. After the 3rd night, you were ready to sleep for a week, let me tell you, but the strange thing was that this was my first night of the 3, so I wasn't tired at all. It started off normal. I arrived at the department, took over from the day staff, logged into my PC. During this time, we usually would set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or maybe even the latest TV series, as there would be a lot of downtime between patients. Like I said too, the first few hours, nothing that interesting, just your average run-of-the-mill night in radiology. Then it came to my break, and now before I tell you more, I should probably explain the layout of the hospital. This hospital is the largest in Wales. It's a teaching hospital and it's pretty old. Now, the best way to get from A to B in this hospital is through what we call the tunnels or the catacombs. These consist of very dimly lit corridors, old abandoned rooms, tunnels, and other creepy sort of decrepit areas. The morgue is also found in these corridors, so it's not a nice place to be during the day, let alone the middle of the night, but it's the quickest way to get to places, if you're staff, that is. There's always been rumors too, and mumblings of strange things happening in these tunnels. Some people say that they saw ghosts in old-fashioned porter uniforms taking wheelchairs to pick up patients. Others say that they have seen shadows following them from the corner of their eyes. But one person has claimed that they were attacked by a person wearing an old nurse's uniform from the 70s. This place is creepy too, even at the best of times. But for me, it just never really fazed me, I guess. I mean, I've been down there hundreds of times before. The worst experience up to this point was having a sluice pipe drip human waste on my head. That in itself was a horror show, but tonight would be something altogether different. And honestly, maybe not even of this physical world. So, like I said before, it was a very quiet night. I had been watching the latest series of One Piece because I'm a bit of a geek. During my downtime, a radiographer or radiology technician for my American friends out there came to take over and cover for me for my break. I decided to go to the 5th floor where the sanctuary, multi-faith chapel, was located. On a night shift, it was one of the most peaceful places in the hospital, but to get there, I had to walk through those tunnels to reach the nearest elevator. I set off on my journey, which would usually take about 15 minutes, scanned my card on the main entrance to the tunnels, and then proceeded to walk through. 2 minutes in, I started to feel like someone was walking behind me, though. It being a busy hospital, and basically the tunnels acted like the highway, I didn't think anything of it. Suddenly, I heard panting, like someone was trying to catch their breath after going for an intense run. I turned around to check, but saw nothing. A bit strange, but thought that it was nothing. Maybe just one of the pipes above my head creaking or a generator pumping. So I carried on walking, but I kept feeling like someone or something was watching me and was walking behind me. Out of sheer confusion and a fear that I missed my turn towards the elevators and found myself in a large section of the tunnels that I've never been in before, littered with old stretchers, beds, hospital furniture and equipment. Some of this stuff was over 50 years old, maybe older, just left to decay in a dark, smelly, decrepit and dusty corridor. This was starting to really creep me out, because in all of this confusion I realized suddenly that I must be lost. It almost felt like I had fallen into the back rooms. Everything sort of looked the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest and could feel the start of a panic attack. I remember clutching my chest and running down a corridor trying to find a signpost or something to tell me where I was. The sense that something was watching me, though, got stronger. Suddenly, I felt something hit my arm in force, almost like someone using a baseball bat. I remember falling to the ground, pulled myself across the floor towards the cold, dusty wall and looked around frantically, trying to find an explanation to what the heck just hit me. Then something caught my eye. It was almost like a black mist with glowing red eyes. It was about 20 meters away from me, just hovering in the middle of the corridor. Was this the thing that had been stalking me the entire time? I got back up and I sprinted. I ran down what felt like 100 different corridors until finally I found a housekeeper or a janitor. He asked me what was wrong because I looked pale, but I couldn't get any words out. He then grabbed me by the arms with a firm grip and said, "Did you see it too?" And that was the last time that I ever stepped foot in those tunnels. To this day, I hear rumors of strange things there. I'm not sure what I saw that night, obviously. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was stressed, maybe it was something though. Why else would the janitor ask me to if I had seen it? What else is down there? Well, I can tell you that one thing is for sure. I won't be going to find out. For as long as I can remember, I've had vivid dreams about UFOs. They come and they go, sometimes disappearing for months, even years. But when they return, they're intense, more real than dreams should be. My house is surrounded by a forest, and in these dreams, the lights always appear above the treetops, silently hovering before descending closer. Recently, the dreams have become more frequent, and the details sharper, almost as if they're trying to tell me something. The lights move in strange, impossible ways, darting at incredible speeds, stopping suddenly, and then hovering without a sound. There's an overwhelming silence in the dreams as well, suffocating and heavy. Even though I don't always see figures, I feel them watching from behind the light. These dreams don't feel random, they feel deliberate, like something is trying to reach me. Since childhood, I've dealt with sleep paralysis, which often accompanies these experiences, but not always. When it happens, I wake up fully aware but completely paralyzed, unable to move or even cry for help. A crushing weight presses on my chest, and shadows gather around me, short, dark figures standing just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes they shift slightly, as if they're whispering among themselves. Other times, glowing red and orange orbs appear, about the size of a volleyball, hovering in my room. They pulse with an eerie energy before disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived. When the paralysis finally breaks, I often wake up screaming, gasping for air. My wife knows this well. She's had to shake me awake many times, trying to calm me down while I catch my breath. Our house has been the site of countless strange phenomena over the years too. Flickering lights, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched in certain rooms. One time, we even received a strange voicemail message. That recording had no missed call attached to it, and went straight to voicemail. Just an unidentifiable voice whispering in a language that we couldn't understand. We are a large family, 5 children, 2 dogs, 5 cats, and 5 chickens. Life in our home is always full of energy and activity. None of my kids had ever had any complaints about any phenomena, but sometimes the animals do behave strangely. Like, for instance, the dogs refuse to enter certain areas of the house for no reason, while the cat sits still for long periods, staring into empty corners as if watching something only they can see. It's nothing overtly alarming, but just enough to make us wonder if they're sensing something invisible. Some of these strange events have been caught on video too, while others have been only witnessed. Doors opening on their own, strange flashes of light in dark rooms, and orbs floating through the air as well at times. Things recently took a more disturbing turn. You see, on December 24th of 2024, during breakfast, my wife noticed something odd on our front door security camera. Intrigued, we checked the footage. Both the front door camera and a wide-angle camera on the corner of the house captured the same event, a glowing orb moving across the yard. It wasn't faint or ambiguous. You can even see the orb reflecting off of my car near the end of the footage. It triggered our motion activity lights as it passed by, and it was in the middle of the night, around negative 15 degrees Celsius. There were no insects, no birds, no reasonable explanation for it. Then, on January 17th of 2025, our backyard camera recorded something even stranger. A shadow passed over the snow-covered ground, briefly blocking the moonlight. It rotated steadily above my house, but there was no visible source, nothing in the sky or around the house that could have cast it. Only a few days later, on January 21st, our side doorbell camera captured another mysterious orb. This one moved with purpose, but not like the dust or the debris that you normally see. Something gliding steadily through the air. It looked disturbingly similar to what we had seen on December 24th, raising more questions than answers. My wife, she's practical, a down-to-earth person. She's never believed in UFOs or the paranormal, always the rational one in our relationship, to be honest. But after living through years of strange occurrences and now even witnessing these recent events on camera, even she cannot explain what's happening. The videos really do speak for themselves. Something unusual is happening around our home, something that feels connected to my experiences. These strange encounters aren't new to me, that's for sure. They've been with me since childhood, in fact, sparking a lifelong fascination with the paranormal. For nearly 10 years, I traveled across Canada and the United States in search for answers, visiting places known for strange phenomena and chasing the unexplained. It became a part of my life, in fact, a relentless pursuit for the meaning in the chaos. But something changed along the way. The activity at home, it began to intensify after each trip, almost like I was bringing something back with me. Every time I returned, the strange phenomena grew worse, more unexplainable sounds, more objects moving, an overwhelming sense of being watched all the time now. It became too much in the end. And so, after 10 years, I quit cold turkey, cutting myself off from the paranormal field entirely. The activity at home slowed down after that as well, though it never truly stopped. It felt like whatever had followed me had lost interest, or at least for a while. To be clear as well, I'm not claiming to know what any of this means. I'm not saying that I've been abducted, nor am I trying to convince anyone of anything. But when I piece everything together, the vivid UFO dreams, the sleep paralysis with shadow figures and glowing orbs, the strange voicemail message, the videos that we've captured over the years, and the recent sightings, it's really, really hard to ignore the connection now. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's just in my mind, and my mind is weaving patterns where there are none. But sometimes, late at night, when I wake up and feel that heavy, lingering presence in the room, I cannot help but wonder if something is watching. Something that doesn't need to come often, because it already knows I'm here. So I started this job about a month ago. I'm an overnight security officer in one of multiple buildings on a large campus. I signed an NDA, so I really cannot be more specific to potentially identify my client. But I started my job training on first shift, and I'll admit that I was skeptical when I started hearing the stories. Things moving, doors opening and closing, actual full-bodied apparitions in the middle of the day, and a little girl that throws things in one of the older buildings. Stuff of that nature. I'm usually pretty sensitive to the paranormal, having experienced it often growing up. I've experienced many unexplainable things, but the buildings I trained in just didn't feel threatening, so I just dismissed it. I've been working my regular shift for 2 weeks now, and on my first day on third shift, I was checking a bathroom when a shadow man leaned out and glared at me as the door shut. Instantly, I felt paralyzed, and I no longer felt safe. But I tried to brush it off and told myself that it should be okay. I mean, I need this job. It's the only place in my area that pays a livable wage. I put up with every whisper, every bang, every uneasy feeling of danger as I walked through the building, and I told myself that it's just an adjustment period. We're new to each other and it should calm down with time. Yesterday, I learned that my building specifically was built on top of a historical graveyard, specifically a graveyard for slaves and their descendants. When the property was bought by my client, the bodies were exhumed and moved across the street, but their original resting place, that is right under my feet every night when I go to work. Tonight I was checking the emergency exits, which are enclosed in a stairwell. I checked the door was secure and there were no hazards. Then I tried to re-enter the building from the stairwell and the door was held tight. I would open it just enough to see that no one was there on the other side and it would slam shut again. A few minutes after that, I finally got out of the stairwell and I entered a loading area and was immediately confronted by a massive shadow figure-looking hat man, at least 7 feet tall, and was watching me. I took a deep breath and I just kept moving. Funnily enough, tonight was probably the least threatened that I've felt since starting working nights here. But anyway, I have a friend on day shift in my building, and before I went into work last night, she told me that the activity yesterday was wild. She warned me that she had been touched on the staircase and that there had been a lot of voices. She told me to be careful around the elevator and emergency exits because she was getting bad vibes, as she called it. Honestly, I should have listened too. My first patrol was eerily quiet. At this point, I'm used to some kind of noise, a humming or a tapping at least, talking and doors opening and closing at most. But my first hour at work was completely silent. My second patrol is when the shadows started moving, stretching and following me. The first floor, which I previously thought was safe, was starting to feel ominous all of a sudden, and everything stayed somewhat calm until midnight. That was when I started getting touched. Being touched, that had never happened before, and I liked it even less that it was on my shoulders and head that were being targeted. I wear my hair in a long braid to keep it out of the way, and last night, it was tugged on multiple times. And unlike my friend, they didn't keep the touches in the stairwell. They followed me in and out of the rooms, and I could hear angry muttering the entire time. I tried talking to them. I asked them to back off a little bit. I just wanted to do my job, and it's Friday anyway. I'll be gone for 2 days after this. I tried to kindly explain why I had to check everything, but the activity just got worse. What ended up being my last patrol at 4 a.m. though was definitely the scariest. I should have known better as well. I should have paid closer attention. On the previously safe first floor, I could hear footsteps following me. Then I checked the second bathroom. I did my ritual, knock twice, hold the door for 5 to 10 seconds, announce myself, and then enter. But when I entered, a massive shadow was stood in the back corner, and I could tell that it did not want me there. I could feel its glare and the raw aggression rolling through the air from it. This was so much worse than anything I'd experienced yet. I was shaky and I stood still in place for a moment. So I apologized but explained that I needed to check the bathroom. It disappeared suddenly and I excused myself to continue my patrol. On the third floor, the door to the staircase was held shut again. They wouldn't let me back in the building for almost 5 minutes. It was a battle to even get in there. I tried walking down, but the lower level doors were also held firm. I wanted to respect their wishes, but I also needed to finish my patrol. Finally, I am able to go to the second floor, and immediately, I felt terrified as the elevator door opened. The floor felt somehow impossibly dark. I walked out, and what was silence exploded into noise. I could hear banging on the walls, and I took a deep breath. I needed to finish this patrol. So, like the idiot I am, I kept going, and my braid was pulled as I moved to go into the central fire riser, the system that feeds the water to overhead sprinklers. But I still had longer to go. I round the corner from the storage quad to go down the main hallway, and the light that doesn't come on until I'm on the other side of the hallway turns on suddenly. And that was when dread filled my gut. I keep going. I make it to the other end undisturbed. As I approach the first bathroom on that side, I hear a creaking sound though. Initially I dismiss it. There's a roof access nearby I have to check, and it probably came from there after all. I do my checks, and I notice that shadows are congregating around the elevator now. I walk up the small, solid concrete stairs to check the roof access, and everything seems okay. I step back inside, and the concrete seems to shake under me slightly, which was definitely unnerving, but this is literally the last part of my patrol, so I was like, it's fine, I'll just get it over and done with. I'll go back to the office, radio in a complete patrol, and it should be fine. And I got into the elevator. The elevator moved maybe a foot before it happened. A loud bang, and I screamed as it fell. The door didn't open. I was dazed and afraid, and for some reason I didn't radio in for backup right that second. I was panicked, I guess, and dumb, I know that, and so I pressed another button. But the door opened, and I was somehow safely on the ground floor. Well, I got out as quickly as I could, and I went to my office to call it in. I would later learn after I got home that my dog had started freaking out at about the same time as I started my patrol on the second floor. She had scared my family in her desperation to get out, and honestly, I'm just really scared now. I know that I'm not safe there. I don't want to just walk away, but I'm actively searching for any kind of protection that I can get, and I will definitely be using the staircases from now on. So I was maybe 9 to 10 years old, and we had just moved to a more islandish neighborhood in West Virginia, right over a massive bridge. We were moving in with some close family friends and their family. The house was relatively big with at least 4 bedrooms, including the office, a basement, 2 bathrooms, and an attic and walk-in closet. In order to get to our room, we had to walk through the upstairs bathroom, then through the walk-in closet, and on the other side of our room was another door that connected to another bedroom. When we first moved in, we were told that the previous owners, or tenants, that they practiced voodoo, although I'm not sure what exactly it was, to be honest. But whatever it was, there were tons of dolls in the house, ranging from baby dolls to just the heads and hanging Barbies, all that. Outside of the room that me and my mother occupied were 4 pencils with yarn heads on them. They were sort of strapped outside the door, and written on each pencil was a name. I don't remember the names, but we all advised our family friends not to remove them. It felt wrong to us, I suppose, but he did anyways, and our bedroom door didn't stay shut for whatever reason. At the time, I was still super small, so I still sat on a full car seat, and we used the car seat to sort of keep the door cracked instead of wide open. And one particular night, all the adults except for 2 and their 3 to 4-year-old child, they went out to a local bar. I stayed back with my iPad watching it in our room. I accidentally turned off my iPad, and at that time I didn't know the password to get back in. So I tried to turn the TV on, but that didn't work, so I was just sort of left there in silence with my toys. I remember feeling how quiet it was. Like, you know that it shouldn't be as quiet as it was. Maybe 10 minutes or so goes by, and for no good reason I can think of, my door just suddenly flies wide open, even with the car seat still in front of it. I remember breaking down in tears over it, and honestly, when I think about it, it still shakes me a bit. I was told the toddler probably used that bathroom and pushed the door open, but with how fast it was, I would have seen them running away or something. I have had other encounters in that house after that, ranging from my toys not being where I left them and not being able to shower with the frosted glass doors, as I could vividly see a figure outside of them that wasn't there. But we moved shortly after, only a couple of months, as things between the family got abusive and weird, and so thankfully I didn't have to put up with it for too long. The following took place in approximately 1990 in a Southern California medical school morgue. I will relate things in detail, as I can clearly still remember them as if it was yesterday. So, the entrance to the main morgue office and laboratory is housed behind a solid, secure pair of double doors. These doors are often left open during work hours, but if nobody is in the office, they are secured. As soon as you step through the threshold in front of you, about a yard away is a big blue shower curtain that conceals the room behind it. To the right is the office area that is somewhat cramped with 3 large desks and 1 huge filing cabinet. The extremely basic files of each case, their ID number and death certificate, are initially kept in the file drawers until after the case has been used or moved on to its next location. To the left is a large storage area that houses large freezers for bodies, as well as numerous shelves with specimens and supplies. As cliché as it may sound, the day of my sighting started out like any other. I was the only one working on 3 separate cases that were all situated on their respective gurneys, and also in their own level of the embalming process. I had been working on the cases for maybe about 3 hours, without interruption from any of my co-workers. I think it's safe to say that I was very absorbed in my work on that particular day. It was getting close to lunch, however, so I decided to wash up and head to the office to take my lunch. As I passed by the door to the room that held the 3 large vertical refrigerators and the row upon row of already embalmed bodies, I looked to my right and clearly saw a full-sized apparition. I froze in my footsteps, like a character in a cartoon, and looked to my right further to see an older man standing in front of the closest vertical refrigerator. It was simply standing there. I could see through him, but at the same time clearly identify it as a person. As I stood there and looked for what seemed like minutes, it was probably only seconds though, the apparition turned and looked at me, and simply faded away and disappeared, almost like cigarette smoke dissipates into its environment. I continued to look in that direction, dumbfounded by what I had just seen. It was not scary in the least, but almost comforting, I guess, as if it was a completely natural, everyday occurrence. I merely went into the office and saw my co-worker William and exclaimed, "You won't believe what I just saw." He was completely unfazed though and looked at me and said, "You saw a ghost." I was more taken aback by his knowing what I had seen than what I had truly seen, to be honest. He went on to tell me that he had seen them quite often and enjoys the interaction when it happens. When we told our co-worker Joe what I saw, they were completely taken aback, scared and frantic. I tried to explain the visit as more of a comforting interaction than one like, think of a typical Hollywood haunting or whatever. That offered little comfort though, and the rest of the day it was rather off-kilter, I guess. One of the other employees that works for the morgue office, in a paperwork capacity exclusively, was Lola. She worked way down the hall, away from the actual work facilities. She was basically responsible for processing every piece of paper that needed to be dealt with through our office, that is. She was a petite, insightful lady who believed strongly in spirited events that involve interactions with the deceased. She would often attend seance-like events with friends and has reported successful contacts. She had plans to attend one of her spiritual meetings. The following day, she would bring it up to the group in attendance, and we all kind of thought that was kind of neat, but really just shrugged it off and didn't think of her involvement in the situation again. That was until 3 days later when she came to speak to us about what she had come across. Apparently, her group leader during this seance-like meeting reached out inquiring as to the desire of the apparition that appeared before me. The group leader received the sense that the apparition was just somewhat confused and didn't quite know where to go. This theme continued during the meeting, with the apparition just being uncomfortable and lacking direction. The other extremely noteworthy feeling, though, the group leader came across was the letter W constantly appearing before her, apparently. It was as if the whole meeting and the interaction with the apparition revolved around the level of confusion in the letter W over and over again. Everyone's curiosity was spiked by what Lola had to say, though, me especially. We all then walked over to where I saw the apparition, and I explained to everybody what I had seen and where I saw it. And that's when things got a little bit eerie. I don't recall who noticed it first, but in one of the refrigerators directly in front of where I saw the apparition was a name tag or label, and the tag said William Wood. There's no doubt in my mind as to what I saw that day, and reflecting back upon it, I believe my conscious level of thinking was down while my subconscious level was up, having been so involved in working on the cases all morning. I think that somehow this allowed my subconscious or inner spirit or whatever you want to call it to perhaps see something that I would not normally see. A sort of heightened level of relaxation, of openness, so to speak. And as you can probably see, all of this has really stuck with me. So, this happened to me, a 27-year-old female, about 6 years ago. At the time, I was working in a bar, so I got off work pretty late, usually around 3 a.m. Since I lived quite close to the bar, I would always walk home after my shift, and there were two different routes that I would take. One was along the street, where most of the city's bars and the clubs were, and it was usually really crowded. Since I was pretty exhausted and I didn't want to see any more people that night, I took the other route, which was much quieter but also much darker, and I never felt very safe there at night. Anyway, as I was walking, a group of drunk guys approached me, blocking my way. I made it clear that I had no interest in talking to them, so they eventually let me pass. A nearby taxi driver must have seen what was going on because he rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride home. I declined, saying that I didn't have to go too far, but he insisted, saying that he wouldn't even charge me. I thought that maybe he was looking out for me since he had seen the incident with the drunk guys, so I made the really stupid decision to accept this offer. After I got in, he asked for my address and we started driving. I even offered to pay him, but he refused. Shortly after, we arrived near my home, but instead of stopping, he just sort of drove past it. I asked where he was going, and he acted like it was an accident, saying that he was just looking for a place to turn around. But he kept driving for a few more minutes until we ended up in an industrial area where he pulled into a dead end. At this point, I was terrified, but honestly I didn't know what to do, especially since my phone had died earlier. I just sort of sat there and eventually said, "Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to turn around." He looked at me, and I think he got scared to follow through with whatever he had planned. After a moment, he simply said that I was right, turned the car around, and drove me back to my place. My heart was pounding as I got out of that car, but I was really, really grateful that nothing terrible had happened that night. I know that it was incredibly stupid to get into that car in the first place, and I still don't fully understand why I made that decision. Honestly though, I think that I just got really, really lucky in the end. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year that I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying some farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who studied abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year, and the first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. His name was Ben. He's about a year younger than me, and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people there are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and the various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people, and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice hot summer, and I was enjoying myself, until one particular night. You see, I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We had partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and I decided to head home eventually. I should describe the layout of the city quickly as well, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment, it was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I'd done many times by this stage. People had warned me about occasional attacks or muggings or robberies or whatever, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings at all times. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west of me, so I had to leave them after about 5 minutes or so, and continued alone with my music as I always did. It must have been around 4 in the morning when I came to a park that I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was actually living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving, even at like 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench, maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that somebody else was approaching him from behind through said bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard somebody approaching. Honestly too, it all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy, still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and just stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was actually happening. You need to understand that this all happened really quickly. Until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock suddenly turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I instantly turned and I ran for my life.
He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked and I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the window with the rock. And suddenly, when the glass broke, he finally ran away. Now, what makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered that I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, I put my music back in, and I quickly walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterwards, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered that I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this whole thing turned out okay, obviously. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing may have actually saved both me and the guy on the bench. I mean, if I hadn't entered that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench, he really might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think that I learned that there are some situations that you really just cannot control. Stay safe out there, everyone, and maybe don't walk through the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. But hey, maybe that's just common sense. So my roommates and I are young girls living alone in our college townhouse neighborhood. The house was built no later than maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and honestly that's really pushing it. But lots of weird stuff has been happening, and last night it all sort of came to a head. So we're all Christians, and I grew up Catholic, so we all very much believe in spirits and demons and all that, and the power of Christ to defeat them. I had a dream maybe a couple of months ago of my dog growling at an evil presence, and I rebuked it in the dream in the name of Jesus and woke up suddenly because my white noise was off and it was 3:33 a.m. I wasn't totally terrified by that or anything, but then my coworker came over and said that she swore that she heard me banging around in the house and the back of the house when I wasn't home. And it keeps happening. I always hear my roommate banging around in her room when she's not even home. We will hear knocking on the walls, and I've heard my dog rustling around in his kennel when he's right next to me, etc., etc. And so I thought that maybe there's an animal somewhere. Until last night. You see, last night I was sitting on the couch doing some homework and watching some TV. I let out a low whistle and I immediately hear it repeated back to me. Again, I am all alone, and so I rewinded the TV to see if it was just a really well-timed coincidence, and there was zero whistling. So I called my sister, who lives 3 houses down, to come over, and she runs over and doesn't see anyone outside around the house or anything. Naturally, I go through the house with my industrial wasp spray can and check to make sure that there's nobody actually in the house. I came back to where my sister is and she says to me, "Don't whistle right now, I'm freaked out." But I can assure you that I didn't whistle at all. But she swore that she heard me whistle again. My roommate finally comes home, but I tell her what happened and eventually I leave, offering her to come with, but she says that she's fine and just wants to go to bed. Then she texts me in around maybe an hour or so and says, "Are you back home?" And I say no, and she tells me that she heard me talking this whole time and I just said yoo-hoo, trying to get her attention. So she heard me talking too. Obviously, something is in this house, and my question is, as a Christian, is what the heck do we do about this? How do we get rid of it? And can we even get rid of it? I've experienced many paranormal encounters while on duty as a police officer, but there was one call that I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of a deceased woman that was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside of the property gate. She said that she had heard me coming from miles away, and I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed that she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed, but she said that she needed to walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. at this stage. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was obviously concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay, and so I asked if I could speak with her and any adults inside, and they welcomed me in. I told her that I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me that nobody else should be home. I then freaked out a bit and began searching the property, but there was nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, which ended up being her mother, and she said that her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman that I spoke with near the gate. And while looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that that was actually her mother, the woman that had passed in that wreck. Honestly, I really have no way to explain this. I mean, did I really speak with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family about what happened? To give a tad bit of background, my family is heavily Catholic, and I find myself a bit skeptical in anything spiritual or religious, I guess. But really, I just don't know how else to explain what has happened to me. When I was maybe 14 to 16, maybe as a way to distance myself from the church, I found an intense interest in the occult, paganism, things of that sort. I would even practice witchcraft from time to time, in an attempt to get some kind of definitive proof that something is out there. Nothing really worked, but it did feel like something was happening when I practiced. A practice I got especially into and would do frequently is meditation, which isn't inherently spiritual, I know that, but it does help in certain cases. Anyways, this story starts while I was meditating in my room. I am maybe, halfway through my 15 minutes that I'd planned to meditate when something just felt wrong all of a sudden. I cannot properly explain the emotion that I had. My best attempt would be the feeling of going down off the peak of a roller coaster, mixed with a sorrow of sorts. Anyway, so I feel that in my gut, and I opened my eyes to scan the room. Everything looked in place, but that feeling just wouldn't go away. I turned to pause my timer, then I noticed a painting on my wall, which I had for quite a while at this stage. It was the Starry Night painting, and as I scanned over to it, something about it was just wrong. It looked as if all the stars were actually glowing. The longer that I looked, the more bright a certain star got as well. It was one of the stars in the top left corner, just to the right of the trees. This star slowly but surely got brighter and brighter, and I was so sure that I was dreaming or hallucinating or something that I had gotten up off of the bed and started to make my way toward the painting. But as I got up and started to move closer, the star would fade. Not as if someone was dimming the lights though. It was as if a fog was setting over this star. As I got even closer, the fog practically snuffed out the star, and in its place it was dark. I sat for a minute trying to just process what had just happened in my brain, still looking at this dark spot on my painting. As I stared though, something started to appear out of the dark noise. At first, I thought it was the star coming back into my vision, but as it became more clear, I saw it for what it really was. A face. A whole figure, actually. Big enough to cover a large portion of the painting. I remember my fight or flight kicking in when realizing what I was actually looking at. I distinctly remember thinking that the feeling of that experience went from curious to bad. Still, I stayed in place and waited to see what else would happen, like I was in some kind of trance. Once the figure was fully visible, I felt like it saw me. We were looking at each other eye to eye, soul to whatever it was, and we sat there for 20 seconds or so with nothing happening. And I was about to be done with this and run out of the room, but then it did something. It started to reach out its hand, not in a threatening way, almost as if it was offering something. I don't really know what it was selling, but I certainly wasn't buying. Its hand almost looked as if it was fully outside of this painting as well. This was the last straw. I'd gotten my taste of paranormal for the night, and I ran to my light switch and flicked on my bright overhead light. I had a dim lamp on for meditation, and looked at the painting. And suddenly, it was totally normal. Nothing different about it. I sat and stared to see if something would happen, and nothing ever did. As I was coming back from my trance, I realized my face was wet with tears, something that I hadn't noticed before the light was on. I then go to my phone to text whoever, telling someone about this, but I stopped before even unlocking it. Almost 30 minutes had passed since I had paused that timer, and that felt like an impossibly long time. There was absolutely no way that I spent 30 minutes staring at a painting just then. It felt like maybe 3 to 4 minutes of watching, tops. After realizing my little time loss, I freaked out and ran into my mother's room. Needing somebody else's presence, I just couldn't stand being alone anymore. She heard my whole story and was 100% convinced that I had just had a run-in with a demonic presence. Putting meaning behind all of the visions, like how the stars were holy ghosts with demons putting a fog over them and all that sort of thing. I didn't know if I was fully on board with that idea, but I was just glad to be with someone other than myself. She then got my dad to go in and bless the room, leaving a Saint Benedict medal in my room to hopefully ward off anything negative. He then took the painting off the wall and took it outside, and that was the last time that I ever saw it. To be honest though, good riddance. I'm actually sharing this now in the same room that this all happened in as well. I won't lie too, I kind of feel off at times in here, I guess. Like I'm being watched, but having the medal and several crucifixes does help ease my feeling. I'm 19 now and about to be headed out for college, and I thought that I would put down this experience in writing before it fades anymore with time. I'm not exactly Catholic now, but I have given up the practice of my past. I'm fully open to any and all explanations that anyone may have as to what happened to me years ago, paranormal or not. And so, if you have anything to share, then thank you. Also, I'd like to just tack on here that I was absolutely sober during this entire experience, and the entire day before that, and hallucinations are definitely not something that I've ever struggled with. I, a 33-year-old male, am a skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. I generally don't believe anything related to the paranormal, and would find explanations for what may be deemed paranormal. Well, except for one which happened to me and my siblings back in 2000. My family, my parents and 2 younger siblings, lived with our grandmother in a 2-story house. Our family lives on the ground floor, whereas my grandmother, she has the 2nd floor to herself. My parents have a separate room while my siblings and I share the same room in separate beds. Our bedroom and our parents' bedroom was connected by a sort of shared bathroom. My grandmother usually comes to our room and uses our bathroom to pee as well, and I guess it was to check up on us as well while our parents weren't home yet. Anyway, one night, our parents took an unusually long time to come home. So to pass the time, my siblings and I just watched Beauty and the Beast in one of those VHS tapes since it was our favorite Disney movie back then. We were watching the movie for some time when suddenly the door to our room just sort of spontaneously opened, and a few seconds later, the door to our toilet opened and closed, and we heard the flushing sound of the toilet. This was followed by the opening of the toilet door and the opening of our bedroom door. I remember my siblings and I being in a sort of state of shock, and we huddled together on the corner of the bed just sort of crying. I also distinctly remember that the television turned to static, and my siblings and I were freaked out the entire time. At the time, my siblings and I were around 9, 8, and 5 years old, so we were fully aware of what was happening. Eventually, our parents arrived and saw us crying, but they really didn't think anything of it. Well, the next day, my mother took me to the bathroom, and she told me that my grandmother had actually passed away. I was certain that I did not tell them about the events that happened the previous night, and more than 2 decades have passed, and my siblings and I never really discussed it. I conveniently thought of that event as a false memory since I never really got any confirmation from external sources that whatever happened was actually real, nor was I able to talk about it with my siblings. I just lived my life thinking that I never truly had a paranormal experience. Anyway, I'm currently doing a PhD in the United Kingdom, and I visited my family back home in the Philippines during the holidays. The entire family was in the car, and we were talking about grandmother's last birthday celebration. We were part Chinese, and she may have been like 70 years old for that birthday, so it was a special celebration and thus memorable.